Hello guys, welcome to Dark Fanfics. So in this video, we will see, what if the goblins discovered 47 loyalty potions in Harry's system and Dumbledore was arrested. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Test of Truth. The marble floor of Gringotts felt unusually cold beneath Harry's feet as he followed the goblin named Griphook down a winding corridor he'd never seen before. Unlike the main hall's grandeur, these passageways were utilitarian and ancient, marked with runes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Is this really necessary?" Harry asked, his voice echoing slightly against the stone. "I only came to make a withdrawal." Griphook didn't slow his brisk pace. "Standard procedure for all heirs approaching their magical majority. The Potter vaults haven't been properly accessed in 14 years. The goblin's voice betrayed no emotion, but Harry caught something, concern, perhaps, in the sidelong glance thrown his way. Behind them, Sirius Black followed in his human form, having insisted on accompanying Harry despite the risk. The Ministry still hunted him, but the goblins operated under their own sovereignty and had granted him safe passage within their walls. "You could have warned me," Harry muttered to his godfather. Sirius shrugged apologetically. "I thought it was just a formality. James went through it too." His voice lowered. "Besides, I didn't expect Dumbledore would allow you to come without one of his order watchdogs. That had been unusual." Mrs. Weasley had protested vehemently that morning when Sirius suggested taking Harry to Gringotts, but Dumbledore, visiting Grimmauld Place unexpectedly, had intervened. "A few hours away from headquarters will do Harry good," the headmaster had said, eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. "Just ensure you're not followed, Sirius." Now, as they descended deeper into the bank, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His scar hadn't hurt for days, a welcome relief, but his mind felt foggy, like he was perpetually waking from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Griphook stopped before an obsidian door inlaid with silver runes. "The inheritance office," he announced, pressing his palm against the center of the door. It melted away, revealing a chamber that looked more like a cross between a medical examination room and a ritual space than a banker's office. A female goblin stood inside, her silver hair pulled back in a severe braid, wearing formal robes with insignia Harry didn't recognize. 3 other goblins attended various stations around the room, working with instruments that looked more alchemical than financial. "Master Potter," she inclined her head slightly. "I am Director Silvertooth, overseer of ancient vaults and inheritance protocols." Harry nodded awkwardly. Nice to meet you." "You will sit," she said, indicating a stone chair in the center of the room. "It wasn't a request." Sirius stepped forward. "I was under the impression this would be a simple verification ritual." "For most wizards, it is," Silvertooth replied evenly. "However, Heir Potter's status as the last of his line, combined with certain magical irregularities our entrance wards detected, necessitate a more thorough examination." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "Magical irregularities? Please sit, Master Potter." Harry glanced at Sirius, who nodded encouragingly despite the concern evident on his face. Taking a deep breath, Harry lowered himself onto the cold stone seat. The moment he made contact, runes around its base illuminated, and he found himself unable to rise. "Hey!" Harry struggled instinctively. "It's just a temporary binding," Silvertooth explained clinically. "The inheritance test can be physically uncomfortable if the subject moves during the procedure." One of the other goblins approached with a shallow stone basin filled with a silvery liquid that wasn't quite water and wasn't quite mercury. "Your hand, please," Silvertooth requested. Harry hesitantly extended his right hand. With surprising gentleness, the goblin pricked his finger with a golden needle. 7 drops of his blood fell into the basin, turning the liquid a swirling crimson that gradually shifted to gold. The effect was immediate. Harry gasped as an invisible force seemed to pull at him from every direction. It wasn't painful exactly, more like the sensation of being turned inside out. The liquid in the basin projected upward in a spiral of light, forming runic sequences that the goblins began reading with increasing alarm. "This can't be correct," one muttered. "Run it again," ordered Silvertooth. "What's happening?" Sirius demanded, moving closer despite a warning gesture from Griphook. Harry barely heard them. Within his body, something was changing. It began as warmth in his stomach that quickly spread outward through his veins like fire, not burning, but dissolving something that had been there so long he'd never noticed its presence. His vision blurred, then sharpened with startling clarity. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct. And his mind, it felt like windows were opening in a house that had been sealed shut for years. "Merlin's beard," whispered Sirius, staring at the complex web of magical signatures now filling the room above Harry's head. "What is it?" Harry managed to ask, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Director Silvertooth's expression had transformed from professional detachment to cold fury. "Potions. 47 distinct loyalty and behavior modification potions, to be precise. Some administered as recently as 3 days ago, others dating back to infancy." Harry stared uncomprehendingly. "That's not possible." "I assure you, it is not only possible but evidently factual," Silvertooth replied. "The inheritance test reveals all magical influences affecting the bloodline heir. What we are seeing here is unprecedented, a systematic, long-term potioning campaign specifically designed to modify your behavior, loyalties, and even personality." Sirius lunged forward, only to be restrained by 2 goblin guards who appeared from the shadows. "Who?" he snarled. "Who did this to my godson?" The goblin running the test consulted a parchment now filling with names. Primary magical signatures belong to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, administered directly or through proxies including Molly Weasley, Alastair Moody, and Dumbledore. Harry interrupted, his voice hollow with disbelief. As he spoke the name, a wave of nausea swept through him, followed by a curious sensation, like a string being plucked inside his chest, then snapping. That's when the memories began to surface. He was 11, sitting in Dumbledore's office after the incident with the Philosopher's Stone. The headmaster offering him a lemon drop with that grandfatherly smile. "Just as sweet to help with the shock, my boy." The candy dissolving on his tongue, and with it, his questions about why the stone had been at Hogwarts in the first place. 12 years old, in the hospital wing after facing the basilisk. Madame Pomfrey stepping out, and Dumbledore leaning close. "A special healing draught, Harry. It will help with the lingering effects of the venom." But afterwards, his mounting suspicions about why Dumbledore hadn't recognized the monster sooner had somehow faded. Countless meals in the Great Hall, the pumpkin juice tasting occasionally different. Mornings at the Burrow with Mrs. Weasley insisting he take a vitamin supplement for growing boys. "Harry. Harry." Sirius's voice broke through the cascade of memories. Harry's eyes refocused on the present, finding his godfather kneeling before him, the binding spell on the chair apparently released. Sirius's face was ashen with horror and rage. "I remember," Harry whispered. "I'm starting to remember everything they made me forget." Director Silvertooth approached with a vial of bright blue potion. "This will neutralize the remaining active compounds and accelerate the dissolution process. Without it, you will experience severe withdrawal symptoms as the potions break down naturally." Harry took the vial with shaking hands. "What will happen to me?" "Your true self will emerge," she replied simply. "Whether that is better or worse than the constructed personality you have lived with, I cannot say." Harry stared at the potion. "And if I don't take it?" "Then you remain under partial influence while the potions slowly leave your system over weeks, possibly months. The loyalty bindings to Dumbledore are already weakening, that's what triggered our wards." Something interrupted his dosing schedule. Harry thought of Dumbledore's strange absence from Grimmauld Place until this morning, how he'd been avoiding Harry's gaze all summer. "He knew," Harry murmured. He knew something was wrong with his control. With sudden determination, Harry uncorked the vial and swallowed its contents in one gulp. It tasted like ice and electricity, sending shocks through his system that made him gasp. And then, clarity. The fog that had surrounded his thoughts, a fog he hadn't even recognized as unnatural, began to dissipate. With it came anger, sharp and white-hot, followed by devastating betrayal that brought tears to his eyes. "I want to see the list," Harry said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I want to know exactly what they've been controlling." Griphook handed him the parchment with a surprising gentleness. "The first column shows the potions, the second their intended effects, the third the administrator, and the fourth the approximate date of first administration." Harry scanned the document, his hands trembling. Affection amplification potion, create artificial fondness for Weasley family, Molly Weasley, age 11 intellectual dampening solution, reduce academic curiosity and performance, Albus Dumbledore, age 11 directed distrust elixir, foster suspicion toward Slytherin house, Albus Dumbledore, age 11 courage enhancement draft, increase reckless behavior, Albus Dumbledore, age 11 personality suppression compound, diminish assertiveness and leadership qualities, Albus Dumbledore, age 15. Months memory manipulation mixture, block specific traumatic memories, Albus Dumbledore, age 15 months. The list continued, detailing potions that controlled everything from Harry's food preferences to his sleeping patterns to his romantic interests. Some had been administered since he was a baby, mere months after his parents' deaths. This is... Harry couldn't find words adequate to the violation. Criminal, supplied Silvertooth. Under both Goblin and Wizarding law. The systematic magical manipulation of a minor, especially a hereditary head of house, carries penalties equivalent to the Imperious Curse. Sirius, reading over Harry's shoulder, let out a string of curses that would have made Mrs. Weasley faint. The thought of her brought Harry's attention to multiple entries with her name. "The Weasleys," he said hollowly. "Were they all in on it?" "The signatures indicate Molly Weasley as the primary administrator within that family," Silvertooth replied. "Whether others knew is beyond what this test can reveal." Harry felt sick. Ron. Ginny. Mr. Weasley. Were any of his friendships real? His stomach lurched as he saw entries specifically designed to create artificial attraction toward Ginny Weasley, administered just last year. "I want to press charges," Harry said suddenly, looking up at the goblins. "Can you do that? Or do I need to go to the ministry?" The goblins exchanged looks that Harry couldn't interpret. Under the Treaty of 1612, Gringotts has independent authority to protect its clients from magical financial fraud, Silvertooth explained. "As this directly impacts the Potter estate and your ability to make uncoerced decisions about your inheritance, we can initiate proceedings immediately." "Do it," Harry said without hesitation. "Harry," Sirius cautioned, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Think about what this means. Dumbledore isn't just headmaster, he's chief warlock, supreme mugwump. I don't care if he's Merlin himself." Harry snapped, the anger finally breaking through. "He's been drugging me since I was a baby. Making me someone I'm not. Making me," his voice broke. "Making me trust him while he was using me like a puppet." As he spoke, another wave of memories surfaced, all the times he'd gone to Dumbledore with concerns, only to leave his office feeling inexplicably reassured despite receiving no actual answers. The way Dumbledore had manipulated him into specific confrontations, then rewarded his recklessness with house points and praise. "There's something else you should know," Griphook said, pointing to a section of the inheritance test Harry hadn't yet examined. "The potions were suppressing your magical development as well. As they leave your system, you may experience significant changes in your magical capacity and control." As if on cue, the torches in the room flared brighter, responding to Harry's emotions. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. "What happens now?" he asked Director Silvertooth. The goblin's sharp teeth showed in what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Now, Herr Potter, we bring the considerable resources of Gringotts against those who have wronged one of our most valuable clients." Grip hook, alert the DMLE. Tell them we are invoking Clause 73 of the Banking Treaty. Grip hook nodded and hurried from the room. Serious, Harry turned to his godfather, suddenly uncertain. What if I'm different when these potions fully wear off? What if I'm not me anymore? Sirius gripped Harry's shoulders, his eyes fierce with protective love. You'll be more yourself than you've ever been allowed to be. And whoever that turns out to be, I'll be right beside you. Your parents would have burned the world to ashes if they'd known what Dumbledore was doing to you. Harry nodded, drawing strength from Sirius's certainty. Then he turned back to Silvertooth. How quickly can you move against Dumbledore? Magical law enforcement should arrive at Hogwarts within the hour, she replied. Given the severity and duration of the offenses, even his positions of authority won't protect him. Good, Harry said, a cold determination settling over him. And I want to be there when they arrest him. I want to see his face when he realizes his perfect plan has failed. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Gringotts healers administered additional potions to ease Harry's transition as decades of magical manipulation unraveled. Each new dose brought more memories to the surface, more realizations about how thoroughly his life had been engineered. By late afternoon, Harry stood in the Ministry's DMLE operations room beside Sirius, under diplomatic protection from the Goblins, watching the deployment of a team of Aurors to Hogwarts. Director Amelia Bones, stern and efficient, had taken one look at the Gringotts evidence and immediately issued warrants. I've suspected Dumbledore of overreach for years, she told Harry privately, but this goes beyond anything I imagined. Rest assured, Mr. Potter, the full force of magical law will be applied here. Now Harry watched through a magical monitoring orb as Aurors arrived at Hogwarts gates. Summer session was underway for certain advanced students, and the castle wasn't empty. The cameras followed the Auror team as they marched purposefully through the grounds toward the headmaster's tower. He'll have been warned, Harry said quietly to Sirius. He has portraits, ghosts, house elves, all loyal to him. Sirius nodded grimly. Don't underestimate Albus. He's always 10 steps ahead. But to everyone's surprise, when the Aurors reached the headmaster's office, they found Dumbledore calmly seated behind his desk, as if expecting them. Ah, Kingsley, his amplified voice came through the monitoring spell. I presume you're here about Harry's visit to Gringotts. Kingsley Shacklebolt, leading the Auror team, seemed momentarily thrown. Albus Dumbledore, you are under arrest for multiple violations of the Magical Protection of Minors Act, illegal use of restricted potions, magical coercion of a hereditary head of house, and 47 counts of administering loyalty potions without consent. Dumbledore's serene expression never wavered. I understand. I shall, of course, come quietly. He stood, placing his wand on the desk. I only ask that you allow me to explain my actions to the Wisengamot in full. What appears sinister often has deeper purpose. Harry felt a surge of rage so powerful that the monitoring orb cracked. He's still trying to manipulate everyone, he hissed. Amelia Bones placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. We're aware of his techniques, Mr. Potter. Special protocols are in place for his incarceration, no access to his magical signature, no communication with the outside world. On the screen, Aurors were placing magic-suppressing cuffs on the headmaster's wrists. For the first time, alarm flickered across Dumbledore's features. You must understand, he said urgently, there are greater threats at play. Voldemort has returned. Harry needs guidance, save it for your trial. Shacklebolt cut him off, nodding to another Auror who cast a silencing charm on the old wizard. Harry watched with a complex mixture of emotions as Dumbledore was led away. Part of him felt vindicated, another part devastated. For all the manipulation, Dumbledore had been the closest thing to a grandfather he'd known. It's just the beginning, Sirius said quietly. The political fallout from this will be enormous. The Order, the Ministry, Hogwarts, everything will be in chaos. Harry nodded, suddenly exhausted as another wave of potions left his system. His magic surged unpredictably, shattering a nearby water glass. "I need to figure out who I really am," he murmured, "before I face any of it." "The goblins have offered sanctuary," Sirius reminded him. 3 days in their healing chambers while the potions clear completely. Harry turned from the monitoring screen, his resolve hardening. "And then what? Go back to the burrow where Mrs. Weasley can dose me again? Return to Hogwarts with half the staff loyal to Dumbledore?" "We'll figure it out," Sirius promised. "One step at a time. First, you heal. Then, we decide who to trust." "Not many," Harry said darkly, thinking of the list of names, people who had known, who had participated. As they left the Ministry under Goblin escort, reporters already swarming as news of Dumbledore's arrest spread, Harry felt something he hadn't experienced before, a cold, analytical clarity. The Harry shaped by potions would have been overwhelmed, reactive. This new awareness felt foreign yet natural, like awakening muscles long kept immobile. At the Gringotts healing chambers, Director Silvertooth met them personally. "The neutralization process will take approximately 69 hours, she informed Harry. "During that time, you will experience memory resurgence, emotional fluctuations, and magical instability. When you emerge, you will be free of external influence for perhaps the first time in your life." Harry took a deep breath and stepped into the chamber. "I'm ready to meet myself." As the door sealed behind him and the healing magics activated, Harry felt another wave of potions dissolving. With it came a searing question that would haunt the days to come: if Dumbledore had gone to such lengths to control him, what truth was the old wizard so desperate to hide? The healing chamber resembled a cave of crystal, its walls pulsating with gentle light that shifted between calming blue and energizing gold. Harry floated in a suspension field at its center, time losing meaning as potions, spells, and compulsions were methodically stripped from his body and mind. Each hour brought new revelations as memories long suppressed resurfaced. Some were mundane: his natural aptitude for subjects Dumbledore had deemed unsuitable, his initial wariness of Ron's friendship overridden by an artificial sense of connection. Others were devastating: the full memory of the night his parents died, including fragments of conversation between Dumbledore and others before he was taken to the Dursleys. "The boy should go to his magical guardians," McGonagall's voice, concerned and firm. "The blood protection is essential," Dumbledore countered. "And a wizarding upbringing would make him difficult to guide appropriately." "You mean difficult to control," a younger Moody had growled. "I don't like it, Albus. James and Lily wouldn't want." "James and Lily are beyond wanting now," Dumbledore interrupted softly. "The greater good must prevail. The prophecy demands careful handling." Prophecy. The word echoed through Harry's consciousness as the memory continued. "At least tell Sirius," McGonagall pleaded. "He's the godfather." "Sirius is impulsive," Dumbledore sighed. "He would raise Harry to question, to challenge. We need the boy compliant, trusting of authority. The Dursleys will ensure he arrives at Hogwarts properly, malleable." In the crystal chamber, Harry's magic flared so violently that alarms sounded. Goblin healers rushed in, casting stabilizing charms as raw power cascaded from his body in waves. "Normal reaction," the head healer assured the others. "The magical bindings are dissolving. His core is rebalancing." Harry barely heard them through the roaring in his ears. Dumbledore had known, had orchestrated, his miserable childhood at the Dursleys. Not for protection, but for control. To ensure Harry would be so desperate for affection, for connection to the magical world, that he would accept Dumbledore's guidance without question. And it had worked perfectly. As this realization settled, something shifted within Harry's magical core. Where there had been chaotic surges, now came a steady pulse of power that felt more controlled, more integral to his being. The goblin healers exchanged significant looks. "Remarkable," one murmured. "The suppression was more extensive than we realized." Through the haze of healing magic, Harry heard them discussing his case. Natural occlumency abilities, blocked since infancy. Affinity for wandless casting. Deliberately stunted to prevent. The implications were staggering. Not just his personality but his magical abilities had been systematically crippled, all to keep him dependent, manageable, and under Dumbledore's thumb. Time blurred again as the healing continued. Harry drifted between memories, processing each betrayal, each manipulation. When he finally emerged from the suspension field, he felt physically lighter yet somehow more substantial, as though he occupied space more completely than before. Sirius waited outside, deep in conversation with Director Silvertooth. Both looked up as Harry approached, their expressions showing surprise. "Harry?" Sirius asked uncertainly. Harry understood the question. Even to himself, he felt different, his posture straighter, his movements more deliberate. The constant anxiety that had been his companion for as long as he could remember had receded, replaced by a focused awareness. "It's me," he confirmed. "Just, more me than I've been allowed to be." Silvertooth handed him a mirror. Harry studied his reflection with detached interest. His features were the same, yet subtly altered, his green eyes more intense without glasses, another revelation, his poor eyesight had been partially potion-induced, his expression more composed. Even his infamous scar seemed less angry, fading from its usual inflamed red to a silvery line. "The healing revealed something else," Silvertooth said, her tone grave. "Something embedded in your cursed scar. Our healers contained it, but we lacked the expertise to remove it safely." Harry nodded, unsurprised. Somehow, he'd always sensed the foreign presence, though the potions had prevented him from examining that awareness too closely. "How much time has passed?" he asked, noting the fatigue in Sirius's face. "For days," his godfather answered. "Things have been chaotic." "Dumbledore?" "In Ministry custody, though his supporters are rallying. The Wizengamot is split. Half believe the evidence is fabricated, others are calling for immediate trial." "And the order?" Sirius grimaced. "Fractured. Moody, Tonks, and a few others have broken away, horrified by the evidence. The Weasleys are divided, Arthur and the older boys are in shock, demanding answers from Molly, who maintains she was only following Albus's medical instructions for your own good." Harry processed this without the emotional turmoil he might have expected. "And Ron? Hermione?" "Ron's torn between family and friendship." "Hermione?" Sirius's expression softened. "She's been researching non-stop, trying to understand exactly what was done to you. She sent these." He handed Harry several scrolls of parchment covered in Hermione's precise handwriting. Harry took them, a surge of cautious hope rising. Perhaps not all his connections had been manufactured. "There's something else," Sirius continued hesitantly. "Voldemort has gone silent. No attacks, no movements. It's as if he's waiting to see how this plays out." Of course he would be, Harry thought. Dumbledore's fall changed everything. "So what now?" he asked, looking between Sirius and Silvertooth. "Now," the goblin replied, "you decide how to proceed." "As a legal adult," "Wait," Harry interrupted. "I'm only 15. The potions triggered an automatic emancipation clause under wizarding law," Silvertooth explained. "Magical manipulation of a minor heir constitutes abandonment of guardianship. You are now legally recognized as an adult and head of House Potter." The implications hit Harry in waves. Freedom from the Dursleys. Control of his vaults. Independence from Dumbledore's machinations. But also, responsibility, decisions, visibility in a wizarding world now thrown into chaos. "I need allies," he said finally. "People I can trust absolutely." Sirius nodded. "The goblins have offered continued sanctuary while you sort things out. And I'm with you, whatever you decide." Harry turned to Silvertooth. "Director, I'll need access to the full Potter holdings, information about any properties I might use, and a secure way to communicate with selected individuals." The goblin nodded approvingly. Already arranged. We anticipated your needs, Lord Potter. The title struck Harry oddly, another piece of his identity Dumbledore had kept from him. And I want to make a public statement, he continued. Before Dumbledore's supporters can control the narrative. The press has been clamoring for access, Sirius confirmed. Skeeter's writing outlandish theories daily. Not Skeeter, Harry said firmly. Xenophilius Lovegood. The Quibbler will publish my exact words without editorial interference. Sirius raised an eyebrow but nodded. Luna's father? Unexpected, but clever. No one will expect it. Harry allowed himself a slight smile. I'm done being predictable. Dumbledore counted on controlling my every reaction. From now on, I make my own choices. As they left the healing chamber, Harry felt the weight of watching eyes, goblin guards, bank patrons who recognized him despite his changed appearance, even the portraits on the walls. News of Dumbledore's arrest had clearly spread, along with rumors of Harry's involvement. A flash of red hair caught his attention across the lobby, Bill Weasley, looking haggard as he spoke urgently with a goblin colleague. Their eyes met briefly. Bill's expression cycled through shock, uncertainty, and shame before he gave a small, solemn nod of acknowledgement. Harry returned the nod coolly, then continued walking. Friendships, alliances, loyalties, all would need to be re-evaluated. But first, he needed to consolidate his position and understand exactly what Dumbledore had been hiding from him all these years. The prophecy. The thing in his scar. The reason for such elaborate control. As Harry stepped out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley, flanked by Sirius and goblin guards, he sensed the shifting winds of wizarding politics. Reporters shouted questions, shoppers stared, and from the shadows, Harry felt the watchful eyes of those with other allegiances, waiting to see what the boy who lived would do now that his puppet strings had been cut. What none of them yet realized was that Harry Potter had never been the weapon Dumbledore had tried to forge. He was something far more dangerous, a young wizard with power, clarity, and a burning desire for truth, no matter the cost. As if sensing his thoughts, Sirius leaned closer. Your parents would be proud, he murmured. James always said the most dangerous thing in the world was a Potter with righteous anger and nothing left to lose. Harry's smile was sharp and cold. Dumbledore should have remembered that before he decided to play God with their son. Ahead lay uncertainty, Voldemort, the fragmented order, a ministry in turmoil, and somewhere, the truth Dumbledore had been so desperate to control. But for the first time in his life, Harry faced that uncertainty as himself, wholly, completely himself. And that made all the difference. Chapter 2, Shattered Foundations. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Potter Haven, casting jewel-toned patterns across the library floor. Harry sat cross-legged on a worn Persian rug, surrounded by open books, scrolls, and scattered notes in his increasingly precise handwriting. The ancestral Potter property, a modest manor house in Wales hidden under layers of protective enchantments, had become his sanctuary in the week since leaving Gringotts. He ran his fingers absently over the leather-bound journal in his lap, a record of memories recovered during his healing. Some entries were clinical and detached, others were stained with tears or marred by angry pen strokes that had torn through the parchment. You haven't slept, Sirius observed from the doorway, levitating a tray of breakfast. Harry looked up, brushing overlong hair from his eyes. Couldn't. Another memory surfaced around 3. Sirius set the tray down and settled into an armchair. Unlike Harry's studious calm, his godfather radiated restless energy. Anything significant? First year. After the Mirror of Erist. Harry's voice remained steady, though his knuckles whitened around the journal. Dumbledore didn't just happen to find me there repeatedly. He was monitoring me the entire time, studying my reactions. The mirror was a test, to see how well the potions were working, how strongly I desired family. Sirius cursed softly. He told me later he saw himself holding woolen socks when he looked in the mirror, Harry continued. Another lie. What he actually saw was me, completely under his influence, willingly sacrificing myself according to his design. The casual cruelty of such manipulation hung between them. Harry had spent days cataloguing similar revelations, Dumbledore's calculated timing of information, the careful selection of which dangers to shield him from versus which to guide him toward, the subtle reinforcement of Harry's isolation from anyone not under Dumbledore's influence. Hermione arrives today, Sirius said, clearly hoping to shift toward more constructive matters. Her parents agreed to the secrecy provisions. Harry nodded, allowing the change of subject. And they'll stay at the Dublin house for safety? Already there with Tonks and Moody as guards. Sirius poured tea for both of them. The Grangers took surprisingly little convincing once they understood the situation. Hermione would have made sure they understood. Harry accepted the tea, his expression softening slightly. She's thorough. The arrival of Hermione Granger was a calculated risk. Harry had spent hours with the Goblin security team devising a transportation method that couldn't be traced or intercepted. Trust came harder now, each relationship requiring careful re-evaluation. But Hermione had been the first to send research about the potions found in his system, her letters free from platitudes or defensiveness. The International Portkey hearing is this afternoon, Sirius reminded him. The Wizengamot wants Dumbledore transferred to an international tribunal. Fudge trying to wash his hands of the situation, Harry murmured. He's terrified of what Dumbledore might reveal during a domestic trial. Probably. Sirius leaned forward. You don't have to attend, you know. Your written statement is enough. Harry shook his head. I need to be there. They need to see me, the real me, not just hide behind prepared statements. The real Harry remained a work in progress. Each day brought subtle changes as his authentic personality emerged from beneath layers of magical manipulation. He was quieter now, more deliberate, with a sharpness that occasionally unsettled even Sirius. His magic, too, had transformed, more controlled yet vastly more powerful, requiring daily training sessions to master. Besides, Harry added, closing his journal, I need to see him. I need him to see me. Sirius didn't argue. He'd learned that this new Harry, once decided, was immovable. The article comes out today too, Harry continued, reaching for a piece of toast. Lovegood promised the morning edition. As if summoned by his words, a tawny owl swooped through the open window, dropping a copy of the Quibbler before settling on a perch by the fireplace. Harry unfolded the magazine, his expression unreadable as he took in the cover. The headline read simply, The Truth Unbound, Harry Potter Speaks. Beneath it was a photograph not of Harry but of 47 potion vials arranged in a lightning bolt pattern, each labeled with its contents and administrator. Subtle, Sirius commented dryly. Harry's lips curved in a slight smile. Exactly as I requested. No exploitation, just evidence. He flipped to the feature article, scanning the text quickly. Perfect. He printed my statement verbatim. The statement was carefully crafted, factual and restrained rather than accusatory, focusing on the medical evidence while raising pointed questions about why such extensive manipulation had been deemed necessary. It mentioned neither Voldemort nor the prophecy, steering clear of topics that might trigger ministry censorship. The prophet will be apoplectic, Sirius predicted. Skeeter's been writing daily character assassinations since she couldn't get an exclusive. Let her, Harry replied, setting the magazine aside. The truth doesn't need embellishment. A soft chime interrupted them, the Manners wards announcing an arrival at the transportation point. Harry stood, his casual demeanor shifting to alertness. That's too early for Hermione, Sirius said, drawing his wand. Harry was already moving, his own wand in hand though he'd been using it less frequently as his wandless abilities strengthened. They proceeded cautiously to the entrance hall where a goblin security orb hovered, displaying their visitor. Neville Longbottom stood in the designated arrival clearing, alone and visibly nervous but determined. Harry hesitated, surprised. I didn't contact Neville. Augusta Longbottom requested security clearance yesterday, Sirius explained. I meant to tell you, but with the hearing preparations. Harry studied Neville through the monitoring orb. His fellow Gryffindor looked different, straighter posture, clearer eyes, a firmness to his jaw that hadn't been there at the end of term. Let him through, Harry decided. First level access only. The manor's defensive wards shifted, creating a safe pathway from the arrival point to the front door. Minutes later, Neville stood in the entrance hall, clutching a leather satchel and looking around with undisguised amazement at the ancestral Potter home. Neville, Harry greeted him, neither warm nor cold. This is unexpected. Neville met his gaze directly, another change from the often timid boy Harry remembered. Gran said I needed to speak with you personally. He took a deep breath. After what happened, after the Gringotts revelation, she ran tests on me too. Harry went very still. And 17 potions, Neville said quietly. Not as many as you, but enough. Memory suppressants mainly, and magic inhibitors. All administered at Hogwarts over the past 4 years. Dumbledore, Harry concluded. Neville nodded grimly. And Snape. The signatures were clear. He opened his satchel, removing a parchment bearing the Longbottom seal. Gran sent this. The Longbottom family formally recognizes the crimes committed against House Potter and stands in alliance. It was a significant political gesture. The Longbottoms were an ancient and noble house with considerable influence, particularly among old light families who might otherwise have remained loyal to Dumbledore. Harry accepted the parchment with a slight bow. Please convey my gratitude to Madame Longbottom. He paused, then added more personally, and I'm sorry about what was done to you, Neville. Something passed between the two young wizards, a recognition of shared violation that created an instant connection deeper than their previous casual friendship. The Quibbler arrived at our breakfast table this morning, Neville said. Gran read it and said, at last. Then she fire-called 3 other family heads. He smiled slightly. I think the alliance is going to grow quickly. Come into the library, Harry offered. We have much to discuss. By mid-afternoon, Potter Haven hummed with activity. Hermione had arrived an hour after Neville, bringing her characteristic analytical approach and a stack of research materials about magical memory recovery. The 3 teenagers now occupied the library's central table, surrounded by books, charts, and multiple cups of abandoned tea. It's essentially gaslighting on a magical scale, Hermione was saying, her voice tight with controlled anger. Systematically making you doubt your own perceptions, memories, and instincts. The psychological impact alone would be classified as abuse under Muggle law, even without the potions. Harry nodded, having reached the same conclusion days ago. The question is why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not just use the Imperius Curse? Too detectable, Neville suggested. And it would have shown up on Ministry monitoring. Besides, this was more insidious, Hermione added. The potions didn't force you to act against your will, they reshaped your will itself. You still felt like you were making your own choices. Harry's expression darkened. Which means anything I did, any risks I took, could be attributed to my own recklessness rather than Dumbledore's influence. Perfect deniability, Hermione agreed. He was never directly responsible, just the concerned headmaster trying to guide his wayward student. The conversation paused as Sirius entered, now dressed in formal Wizengamot robes. It's time, Harry. The hearing starts in 30 minutes. Harry stood, rolling his shoulders to release tension. He'd chosen to wear traditional but understated robes in Potter colors, deep burgundy with subtle gold accents, a visible statement of his heritage without ostentation. We'll continue researching, Hermione promised. Focus on the prophecy references and the memory blocks around your parents. Neville looked up from the tome he'd been examining. I'll check the Longbottom archives when I return home. There might be information about the original order that could help piece things together. Harry nodded gratefully. Having allies he could trust with specific tasks was still a novel experience, one untainted by the artificial bonds created through potions. Be careful at the Ministry, Hermione cautioned. Dumbledore still has supporters throughout the departments. I know, Harry replied simply. The Daily Prophet had been running a subtle campaign suggesting Harry had been confounded or was suffering from potion withdrawal psychosis. Only the incontrovertible Gringotts evidence had prevented more direct attacks on his credibility. Sirius extended his arm, holding a small silver pin. Portkey to the Ministry's secure entrance. Amelia Bones arranged it personally. Harry touched the pin, bracing himself for the unpleasant sensation. As Potter Haven disappeared in a swirl of color, he centered himself, reviewing the mental shields the goblins had helped him construct. Today he would face Dumbledore for the first time since the arrest, the man who had shaped his entire life through deception. The real test wasn't what would happen in the Wizengamot chamber. It was whether Harry could maintain his hard-won autonomy in the presence of the wizard who'd spent 14 years ensuring he never had any. The Ministry's lower levels buzzed with tense energy. Aurors lined the corridors leading to Courtroom 10, their expressions professionally blank but their eyes following Harry and Sirius with undisguised curiosity. Madame Bones met them at a security checkpoint, her monocle glinting under the torchlight. Lord Potter, Mr. Black. She nodded briskly. You'll be seated in the witness section. The international delegation has already arrived. Harry returned her nod. Has he said anything? Nothing of substance. Merely expresses concern for your well-being and insists all will be clarified in due course. Her lips thinned. Classic Dumbledore, implying greater knowledge while revealing nothing. They proceeded into the courtroom, which had been modified for the hearing. Representatives from the International Confederation of Wizards occupied a raised platform, their formal robes marking them as judiciary officials. The Wizengamot members filled the traditional seats, with notable gaps where Dumbledore's strongest supporters would normally sit. As Harry entered, a ripple of murmurs swept through the chamber. Many were seeing him for the first time since the potions had cleared his system. He kept his posture relaxed but confident, acknowledging the chief warlock with a respectful inclination of his head. Quite the stir you're causing, Potter, drawled a voice to his left. Harry turned to find Lucius Malfoy regarding him with calculated interest. Unlike their previous encounters, the elder Malfoy's customary contempt was absent, replaced by something closer to wary assessment. Lord Malfoy, Harry replied evenly. I suppose upheaval always creates interesting opportunities. A flicker of surprise crossed the man's aristocratic features at Harry's composed response. Indeed. Particularly for those wise enough to navigate changing currents. Before the cryptic exchange could continue, the doors opened again. A hush fell as Albus Dumbledore was escorted in, flanked by 4 Aurors. The former headmaster wore simple grey robes rather than his usual colorful attire, and magic-suppressing cuffs encircled his wrists. Yet he maintained his characteristic serenity, blue eyes twinkling as they swept the chamber. Those eyes found Harry immediately. Something complicated passed across Dumbledore's features, surprise, calculation, and perhaps a flash of genuine remorse. Harry met his gaze steadily, allowing his occlumency shields to solidify without completely masking his emotions. Let Dumbledore see the betrayal, the anger, the determination. Let him understand exactly what his potions had suppressed. The chief warlock called for order, and the proceedings began. Harry listened as the charges were formally read: 47 counts of illegal potioning, manipulation of a minor, interference with a lordship line, and additional violations of magical guardianship protocols. These charges carry maximum penalties of 50 years in Azkaban under British magical law, the chief warlock stated. However, given the defendant's position as supreme mugwump and the international implications, this hearing will determine jurisdiction for the full trial. Dumbledore was invited to make a preliminary statement. He rose slowly, the chains on his cuffs clinking softly in the hushed chamber. I thank the Wizengamot for this opportunity, he began, his voice gentle and reasonable as ever. What appears before you as criminal activity represents, in truth, necessary protections for a child marked by prophecy and hunted by the darkest wizard of our time. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Harry kept his expression neutral, though internally he noted the immediate invocation of greater good justifications. Harry Potter is not merely a boy, Dumbledore continued. He is, through no fault of his own, a focal point of magical destiny. The potions administered were medically prescribed to shield him from traumatic memories, protect him from external influence, and guide his development toward fulfillment of his prophesied role. That is quite enough, Mr. Dumbledore, interrupted the ICW's senior representative, a severe-looking witch with silver hair. You reference a prophecy that has never been officially disclosed to this body. Furthermore, medical necessity requires diagnostic record and healer authorization, neither of which appears in evidence. Dumbledore inclined his head. Of course, Madame Archambault. I merely wish to establish context for what may otherwise seem inexplicable. Your context, Mr. Dumbledore, constitutes your defense, she replied coolly. Which is not the purpose of today's hearing. Harry watched the exchange with detached interest. Dumbledore was attempting to establish narrative control, to frame his actions as protective rather than manipulative. The approach was predictably effective with certain Wizengamot members, whose expressions had softened at the mention of Harry's prophesied role. When invited to speak, Harry rose calmly. The chamber went silent again, all eyes fixed on the young wizard whose appearance and demeanor contrasted sharply with their expectations. I stand before you as myself, perhaps for the first time in my life, he began, his voice clear and steady. The potions discovered by Gringotts weren't administered as protection. They were designed to create dependency, suppress my natural abilities, and ensure compliance with one man's vision of who I should be. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the chamber. I've spent the past 2 weeks recovering memories that were suppressed, not for my benefit, but to prevent me from questioning Professor Dumbledore's decisions. Memories of being told to trust him absolutely. Memories of being guided toward specific friendships and away from others. Memories of being praised for reckless actions that served his purposes while being subtly punished for showing independence. Harry turned slightly toward Dumbledore, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Professor Dumbledore speaks of a prophecy. If such a prophecy exists, I, its apparent subject, was never informed of its contents. Instead, I was molded through chemical means into a weapon to be deployed according to his timing. That is not protection. It is the opposite of protection. The simplicity and dignity of Harry's statement created a powerful impression. Even members known to be Dumbledore loyalists shifted uncomfortably. Questions followed, most directed at the Gringotts representatives who presented the evidence. When asked directly about the alleged prophecy, Harry replied truthfully that he had no knowledge of its specific contents, a fact that visibly disturbed many Wizengamot members. How could Dumbledore justify his actions based on a prophecy he had never shared with its subject? After 2 hours of testimony and legal arguments, the international delegation withdrew to deliberate. Harry remained seated, aware of the covert glances directed his way. Sirius leaned closer. You're handling this perfectly, his godfather murmured. Calm, factual, focused on the violation rather than vengeance. Harry nodded slightly. I don't need to embellish anything. The truth is damning enough. Across the chamber, several familiar faces caught his attention. Arthur Weasley sat with Percy, both looking deeply uncomfortable. Nearby, Professor McGonagall's expression was rigid with suppressed emotion. Most surprising was Severus Snape, lurking in a shadowed corner, his black eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that suggested he was completely re-evaluating everything he thought he knew. The delegation returned sooner than expected. Madame Archambault rose to deliver their decision. Given the nature of the crimes, their duration, and the defendant's international standing, this body determines that jurisdiction shall transfer to the International Confederation of Wizards Judicial Council. The defendant will remain in ministry custody under current security protocols until formal extradition 3 days hence. It was the outcome Harry had expected. An international trial would be more impartial, less vulnerable to Dumbledore's decades of influence within Britain. It also meant the full proceedings would happen far from Hogwarts, reducing the old wizard's ability to draw on alliances and resources there. As the hearing concluded, Dumbledore was escorted toward a side exit. He paused as he passed near Harry, turning despite his guards' attempts to keep him moving. "Harry," he said softly. "I hope one day you will understand that everything I did was for your protection. The path before you is more dangerous than you can imagine." Harry met those blue eyes directly, no longer affected by their grandfatherly twinkle. "That should have been my choice to make. Not yours." Something like genuine sadness crossed Dumbledore's features. "Perhaps. But the potions merely directed you toward the light, my boy. I fear what awakens in their absence." Before Harry could respond, the Aurors moved Dumbledore along. The cryptic warning lingered, reinforcing Harry's determination to uncover exactly what Dumbledore had been hiding all these years. The chamber gradually emptied, with many Wizengamot members clearly wanting to approach Harry but hesitating, unsure of his reaction. Sirius maintained a protective presence, subtly discouraging those without genuine business. As they prepared to leave, Madame Bones approached with Augusta Longbottom at her side. The formidable Longbottom matriarch surveyed Harry with approval. "Well handled, Lord Potter. Dignity without compromise, precisely the approach needed." "Thank you, Madame Longbottom. Neville arrived safely this morning." "Good." She nodded briskly. "He needs allies his own age who understand what was taken from him. As do you." Her shrewd eyes narrowed. "I've initiated contact with certain families who may have suffered similar interference. The pattern appears broader than initially suspected." Harry absorbed this with growing unease. "How much broader?" "We've confirmed 3 additional cases among your yearmates," Madame Bones said quietly. "Memory suppressants primarily, though nothing approaching your case's complexity." "Who?" Harry asked, though he had suspicions. "Ms. Lovegood, most severely," Augusta replied. "Also Ms. Bones and Mr. Thomas. 3 students who had shown independent thinking despite influence attempts." The pattern suggested Dumbledore had been systematically identifying and neutralizing students with particular potential or tendencies. "We should discuss this further in a more secure location," Madame Bones suggested, glancing around the emptying chamber. Harry nodded. "Potter Haven is available to you both, should you wish to continue this conversation." As they made arrangements, Harry noticed Lucius Malfoy lingering nearby, obviously listening. The elder Malfoy caught his eye and inclined his head slightly before departing, a gesture that could have been mere acknowledgement but felt more like the opening move in a much longer game. The flue flared green in Potter Haven's reception room, admitting Hermione in a swirl of ash and nervous energy. She stumbled slightly, caught herself, then looked up with wide eyes at the group assembled in the drawing room. "Sorry I'm late," she began, then stopped as she registered the unexpected gathering. Augusta Longbottom occupied an armchair like a queen holding court. Amelia Bones stood by the fireplace in conversation with Sirius. Neville sat with Harry at a small table covered with parchments. Most surprisingly, Susan Bones and Luna Lovegood were curled up on a window seat, deep in whispered conversation. "The hearing went well," Harry said by way of explanation. "And led to some revelations." Hermione's quick mind grasped the implication immediately. "More victims?" "Not just more," Harry replied grimly. "A pattern. Students with certain qualities being systematically suppressed." Over the next hour, they pieced together what they knew. Luna had been dosed with memory-suppressing and confusion potions since her first year, likely to discredit her when she began noticing magical patterns others missed. Susan had received mild loyalty potions keyed to Dumbledore rather than her aunt, possibly to provide a monitoring point within the DMLE director's family. Dean Thomas, who hadn't yet been contacted, showed evidence of magical suppression similar to Neville's. "The question," Amelia Bones said, bringing their discussion back to focus, "is why these specific students? What qualities or potential was Dumbledore attempting to control? Luna spoke up, her voice dreamy but her eyes sharp. We all saw differently. Not just thought differently, saw differently. She twisted a strand of pale hair around her finger. The potions made me doubt what I was seeing. Made me think I was imagining the patterns in magic. Harry considered this. Neville's natural affinity for plant magic was suppressed. My Parseltongue ability was redirected. Made to seem dark and shameful rather than useful. Special magical perception and rare talents, Hermione mused. But why suppress them? Shouldn't Dumbledore have wanted to develop such abilities against Voldemort? Unless he didn't want anyone else powerful enough to challenge his authority, Augusta said bluntly. Or capable of perceiving his manipulations. The room fell silent as they considered the implications. Dumbledore hadn't just been controlling Harry's development, he'd been systematically identifying and neutralizing students with unusual potential throughout Hogwarts. There will be more, Sirius predicted. Many more, once people start looking. Harry leaned back in his chair, processing everything they'd learned. This goes beyond preparing me as a weapon against Voldemort. This was about maintaining control of magical Britain's future leadership. Speaking of leadership, Amelia interjected, Hogwarts requires a new headmaster. The Board of Governors meets tomorrow to make an interim appointment. McGonagall is deputy, Hermione pointed out. Augusta shook her head. Minerva was too close to Albus for too long. There are questions about how much she knew or suspected. Who, then? Harry asked. Filius Flitwick is the leading candidate, Amelia replied. With Pomona Sprout as deputy. Both were notably absent from Dumbledore's inner circle despite their senior positions. The conversation continued as they explored implications and next steps. Throughout the discussion, Harry remained thoughtful, absorbing perspectives while formulating his own strategy. These allies, chosen freely rather than through potion-induced loyalty, represented a beginning. But the wizarding world's political landscape was shifting daily, and Voldemort remained an active threat despite his current silence. As evening approached, Augusta and Amelia departed, taking Susan with them but leaving Luna at her request. The reduced group moved to the kitchen where Sirius insisted on cooking dinner himself rather than calling the house elves. You're quieter than usual, Hermione observed, sitting beside Harry at the broad wooden table. Processing, he replied. Every day brings new revelations about how extensively my life was manipulated. Hermione hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Harry, how different are you, really? I mean, the core of who you are, is that still the same? It was a complex question that Harry himself was still exploring. He considered his answer carefully. The basic values are there, he said finally. Courage. Loyalty to those who deserve it. Determination. But how I express those qualities has changed. My thought processes are clearer. I'm less impulsive, more strategic. And my magic. He paused, looking at his hands. It feels like I've spent years trying to pour the ocean through a straw, and suddenly the restrictions are gone. You seem calmer, Neville observed. But also, sharper somehow. Luna nodded. Your edges aren't blurry anymore. Your magic has a cleaner signature. What bothers me most, Harry admitted, is knowing that my connections to people were artificially influenced. I'm constantly questioning which friendships were real versus manufactured. His eyes met Hermione's, and he saw her unspoken question. Yours feels real, he assured her. There were potions to make me less academically inclined, which affected our interactions, but nothing specifically targeting our friendship. Relief washed over her face. Good. Because I couldn't bear thinking that was fabricated. The conversation might have continued, but a chime from the communication mirror on the wall interrupted them. Harry activated it with a gesture, revealing Griphook's serious face. Lord Potter, the goblin began without preamble, we've completed the analysis of the object extracted from your scar. The kitchen went silent, everyone's attention fixed on the mirror. "And?" Harry prompted. "It was a soul fragment," Griphook stated bluntly. "A portion of the Dark Lord's soul, embedded during the attack that gave you that scar." Despite having suspected something similar, the confirmation hit Harry hard. "A Horcrux," he said flatly. "I was carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul." "Indeed. Though unwillingly and unknowingly, which prevented it from fully integrating. The loyalty potions may have inadvertently helped contain its influence." "Is it gone now?" Hermione asked, her face pale. "Neutralized and contained," Griphook confirmed. "Our curse breakers extracted it without damage to Lord Potter's own magical core." Harry processed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. "Dumbledore knew," he said with absolute certainty. "He knew I had this thing in me. That's why he was so intent on controlling my development." "But why not remove it?" Sirius demanded. "Why leave Harry carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul for 14 years? "I intend to ask him that question directly," Harry said, his voice deceptively calm. "Along with what exactly this prophecy entails." After concluding the call with Griphook, the group fell into troubled silence. The discovery explained much about Dumbledore's actions while raising even more disturbing questions. "The connection to Voldemort," Hermione said slowly. "Your ability to sense him, the dream visions, that was because of this soul fragment?" Harry nodded. "And Parseltongue too, I suspect. Though the goblins believe some magical abilities may have been awakened rather than transferred, the fragment acting as a catalyst rather than the source. This changes our understanding of your role in the conflict," Neville observed. "Dumbledore may have been preparing you for something specific related to this connection." "Like what?" Sirius asked, his protective instincts clearly triggered. Luna's soft voice cut through their speculation. "Sacrifice," she said simply. "He was preparing Harry to die at the right moment." The blunt assessment stunned them into silence. Harry felt the truth of it settle in his bones, a cold certainty that Dumbledore's grand design had always included his death. The prophecy must contain something about this connection, Hermione reasoned, her analytical mind pushing through the horror of Luna's observation. Something that made Dumbledore believe Harry's death was necessary to defeat Voldemort. Harry rose from the table, decision made. "Then we need to hear the prophecy directly. The Department of Mysteries will have the record." "Breaking into the DOM isn't exactly a weekend activity, Harry," Sirius cautioned. "Who said anything about breaking in?" Harry replied with a slight smile. "As an emancipated lord of an ancient house, I have the right to request access to any prophecy with my name on it. Madam Bones can facilitate the official request." Hermione looked impressed. "That's, actually completely legal." "I'm done playing by Dumbledore's rules," Harry said simply. "It's time to write my own." The next morning brought the Daily Prophet's predictable response to the hearing. The front page featured a dramatic headline, "Boy Who Lived Rejects Dumbledore's Protection as Dark Lord Gathers Strength." The article beneath alternated between subtle sympathy for Dumbledore's difficult position and concern about Harry's radical personality change following the cessation of medicinal potions. Hermione tossed the paper aside in disgust. "Medicinal? They're still pushing his narrative." Harry merely shrugged, focused on his breakfast. "Expected. The prophet follows ministry direction, and Fudge is hedging his bets. He can't openly support Dumbledore after the evidence, but he's leaving room for rehabilitation if public opinion shifts. The Quibbler circulation has tripled," Luna mentioned dreamily. "Daddy says we've had to do 2 additional print runs. People want to read your actual statement." Their breakfast was interrupted by the arrival of an official-looking owl bearing a ministry seal. Harry accepted the letter, scanning it quickly. "The Department of Mysteries has approved my request," he announced. "I can view the prophecy tomorrow morning." "That was fast," Neville remarked. "Amelia must have expedited it," Sirius said. She understands the urgency. Harry nodded, then glanced at the day's schedule prepared by Griphook. The press conference is at 11. Are you all clear on the security arrangements? Following the hearing, Harry had agreed to a limited press event, strictly controlled and held on neutral ground. It represented a calculated risk, but remaining completely secluded would only fuel speculation. Polyjuice for Luna and me when we accompany you as staff, Hermione confirmed. Neville and Sirius visible as official allies. And we only address questions about the potions and Dumbledore's arrest, Neville added. Nothing about future plans or Voldemort. Harry nodded, satisfied. Working with people who understood strategy without need for artificial compliance was refreshing. His circle remained small but effective, each member contributing unique perspectives. As they prepared to leave for the conference, Harry paused by the library door, struck by a sudden memory fragment, one of the recovered scenes from his childhood. He was 6, sitting alone in his cupboard, concentrating intensely on a small cut on his finger. Aunt Petunia had slapped his hand for breaking a plate, and the edge had caught his skin. Heal, he whispered, focusing all his will on the injury. Slowly, impossibly, the skin began to knit together. Later that night, Dumbledore arrived, though Harry hadn't known his name then, just the strange old man with the beard who sometimes appeared and made his aunt and uncle act oddly subdued. Remarkable, even at this age, the old wizard murmured, wand moving in patterns over Harry's sleeping form. But too soon, much too soon. We must ensure development proceeds according to plan. A vial of potion, spelled directly into his system. Then darkness, and the memory itself locked away until now. Harry. Hermione's concerned voice brought him back to the present. Are you all right? He blinked, refocusing. Another memory. Dumbledore suppressing my accidental magic when I was 6. I was healing myself. Sirius's expression darkened. How many times did he visit you there? We thought you were completely isolated from the magical world until your Hogwarts letter. So did I, Harry replied grimly. Apparently, he monitored me regularly. Adjusting the potions, suppressing abilities that emerged too early or too strongly. That's how he maintained the dosing during summers, Hermione realized. He must have had a way to administer potions without directly interacting with you. The implications were disturbing, years of clandestine manipulation while Harry believed himself abandoned by the magical world. We should go, Neville reminded them, checking his watch. The press won't wait. Harry nodded, putting the memory aside for later examination. Today's goal was straightforward, present a controlled, dignified image to counter the prophet's insinuations. The prophecy, Voldemort, and the deeper conspiracy would come later. The International Conference Centre in magical Edinburgh had been selected for its neutral ground and strict security protocols. As Harry's group arrived through a private fluke connection, they found the main auditorium already filled with reporters from across magical Europe. The Dumbledore case had captivated international attention, combining celebrity, politics, and scandal in irresistible proportions. Remember, brief opening statement then 5 pre-screened questions, Sirius murmured as they took their positions on the platform. We leave immediately after, no informal comments. Harry nodded, surveying the assembled press with calm assessment. Rita Skeeter sat prominently in the front row, acid green quill already poised. Beside her, representatives from international publications studied Harry with professional interest, noting the differences from his previous public appearances. At precisely 11 o'clock, the moderator, a neutral Swiss diplomatic official, called for attention and introduced Harry formally. Lord Potter will make a brief statement regarding recent events, after which he will take limited questions. As agreed, these questions have been submitted and reviewed in advance to ensure relevance and propriety. Harry stepped forward, his posture relaxed but dignified. Gone was the nervous, disheveled boy the press had come to expect. In his place stood a composed young lord, his famous scar faded to a silvery line and his green eyes clear and direct without glasses. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice steady and carrying easily through the room. Recent events have been difficult and disorienting for many in our community. The discovery of long-term potion use without my knowledge or consent has been personally devastating, forcing me to question which thoughts, feelings, and even memories were authentically mine. He paused, allowing the gravity of this to register. I understand that for many, Albus Dumbledore represents wisdom, protection, and stability. Learning of his actions has created cognitive dissonance, a struggle to reconcile the public figure with the evidence presented. I experience this dissonance myself daily, as I recover suppressed memories and recognize the extent of the manipulation. A rustle passed through the audience. Harry's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of this conflict, without vitriol or accusations, created a compelling impression. I am not here to denounce Professor Dumbledore's lifetime of service, nor to speculate on his motives. I am here to affirm that regardless of intention, the systematic potioning of a child is unacceptable. The ends, however noble, cannot justify such means. He concluded with a simple statement of his intentions: to recover fully from the potion's effects, to continue his education, arrangements pending, and to cooperate fully with authorities investigating the matter. The brevity and dignity of his address left many reporters visibly reassessing their preconceptions. The questions, though pre-screened, still probed sensitive areas. Harry addressed them with remarkable composure. Yes, my appearance has altered as the potions left my system. The poor eyesight was partially potion-induced, as were certain aspects of my physical development. The Goblins' healing protocols accelerated my recovery to my natural state. No, I have not had direct contact with Professor Dumbledore beyond yesterday's hearing. I believe the International Tribunal will provide appropriate context for any further communication. Regarding my education, arrangements are being finalized. I intend to complete my OWLs on schedule, though the format may differ from standard Hogwarts attendance. Throughout the conference, Harry maintained a delicate balance, respectful of institutions while clear about the violations he'd experienced. He avoided both victimhood and vengefulness, projecting instead a measured determination to move forward. As the final question concluded, the moderator stepped forward to end the session. Just as Harry prepared to leave the podium, Rita Skeeter stood, calling out without recognition. Lord Potter. The wizarding world deserves to know, has the removal of Dumbledore's potions affected your position regarding you-know-who's return? Many are concerned your claims were potion-induced delusions. A ripple of tension passed through the room. The question was deliberately provocative, designed to either discredit Harry's previous statements or force him to address Voldemort directly. Harry paused, meeting Skeeter's gaze calmly. The potions affected my perceptions, decision-making, and certain memories, Ms. Skeeter. They did not, however, create false experiences. I witnessed Voldemort's return in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. That fact remains unchanged, regardless of who chooses to believe it. Without waiting for the reaction, he nodded to the moderator and stepped back, signaling the end of his participation. As his group moved swiftly toward the exit, he caught glimpses of the reporters' expressions, calculation, reassessment, and in some cases, a reluctant respect. Outside, their security detail escorted them to the designated departure point. Hermione, still disguised by Polyjuice, leaned closer to Harry. That went better than expected, she murmured. Especially the Voldemort question, it was perfect to acknowledge him directly without making it the focus. Harry nodded slightly. Skeeter wanted to paint me as either a fearmonger or a recanting hysteric. Better to be matter-of-fact. Sirius clapped a hand on Harry's shoulder as they reached the portkey point. James would have been impressed. You handled those vultures like you've been doing it all your life. For the first time that day, Harry allowed himself a genuine smile. Maybe some qualities run in the blood, potions or not. Night found Harry alone in Potter Haven's East Tower, seated at a window overlooking the moonlit valley below. The day's events had been draining, requiring constant vigilance and controlled presentation. Now, in solitude, he allowed himself to process the emotions he'd kept carefully regulated. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, not the hot, impulsive rage that had characterized his potion-influenced years, but something colder and more focused. Beneath it lay grief for the authentic childhood and development he'd never experienced, the genuine connections he'd been denied, the person he might have been without interference. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, recognizing Sirius's distinctive pattern. His godfather entered carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might want this. It's your mother's hot chocolate recipe, the one she always made after difficult days." Harry accepted the mug gratefully, the rich aroma triggering a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place. "Did she make it often?" Sirius settled into the window seat opposite Harry. "Whenever any of us needed comfort. After order missions, during the worst days of the First War." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Your father used to say Lily's chocolate could heal wounds potions couldn't touch." "Tell me about them," Harry requested quietly. "Not just the usual stories about Dad's pranks or Mom's brilliance. Tell me who they really were, the parts Dumbledore never mentioned." Sirius studied him thoughtfully. "You're more like both of them now, you know. Without the potions dampening your personality. Lily's analytical mind, James's strategic thinking. They were much more complex than the simplified versions you've heard." Over the next hour, Sirius shared memories Harry had never heard, how Lily had been fascinated by the intersection of Muggle science and magic, developing hybrid approaches that purebloods found bewildering and effective. How James had been not just a prankster but a talented magical inventor, creating specialized charms for aura equipment during the war. "Your mother questioned everything," Sirius recalled. "Never took magical theory at face value. It drove her professors mad sometimes, especially when she proved conventional wisdom wrong." "And my father?" Harry prompted, absorbing these new dimensions of his parents. James saw connections others missed. Patterns, weaknesses in systems. Made him brilliant at both pranks and battle strategy. Sirius smiled sadly. Dumbledore found them both rather challenging to direct within the Order. They didn't follow instructions blindly. The implication was clear. Harry's natural tendencies toward questioning authority and independent thinking hadn't just been suppressed to make him easier for Dumbledore to control, they'd been inherited traits the old wizard had recognized and deliberately neutralized. "Do you think Dumbledore feared I'd be too much like them?" Harry asked. "Too difficult to manipulate toward whatever end he had planned?" Sirius considered this. "I think, he saw in you the potential to be greater than either of them. And that terrified him, especially with the prophecy hanging over everything." They sat in silence for a moment, the implications settling between them. "Tomorrow we hear the prophecy," Harry said finally. "Whatever it contains, I won't let it define me the way Dumbledore intended." Sirius nodded, his expression fierce with pride and protection. James and Lily defied prophecy and expectation their entire lives. Their son will do no less. As his godfather left, Harry turned back to the window, watching clouds drift across the moon. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new understanding of why his life had been so thoroughly engineered. But unlike before, he would face those revelations as himself, fully and authentically himself, for the first time. In that simple fact lay a victory Dumbledore had never anticipated. The weapon he had so carefully crafted had broken free of its creator's design and was now being forged anew, in fire of its own making. Chapter 3, Rising from Ashes. The Department of Mysteries lived up to its name. Harry descended in a controlled access lift with Amelia Bones beside him, the only sound the gentle hum of ancient magic that permeated the Ministry's deepest level. Unlike the ornate upper floors with their polished woods and gleaming marble, here the aesthetic was utilitarian, brushed metal, smooth stone, and softly glowing runes that pulsed with monitoring enchantments. "Few outsiders ever enter this department," Madame Bones commented, breaking the silence. "The unspeakables maintain their independence even from the minister." Harry nodded, mentally reviewing what little he knew about the Ministry's most secretive division. "That's why you arranged this through official channels rather than your personal authority?" "Precisely. The DOM acknowledges magical law and inheritance rights, but not political favor. She adjusted her monocle, studying Harry with professional assessment. You continue to surprise me, Lord Potter. Most wizards your age would be visibly nervous entering these halls. Harry considered this. The old Harry, the potion-influenced version, would indeed have been fidgeting, heart racing with anxiety disguised as excitement. This new equilibrium still felt strange sometimes, like wearing clothes that fit perfectly after a lifetime of hand-me-downs. I find I process emotions differently now, he said finally. The anxiety is there, but it's informative rather than overwhelming. The lift doors opened to reveal a circular chamber with identical black doors spaced evenly around its circumference. A lone figure waited for them, clad in the featureless grey robes that marked an unspeakable Lord Potter. The voice was deliberately modulated to be gender-neutral. Director Bones. I am Unspeakable Croaker, Hall of Prophecy Custodian. You have requested access to Prophecy Record PS 310719880 APSR/LWVR. Harry inclined his head. I have. You understand the viewing of one's prophecy cannot be undone. That knowledge, once gained, may alter the very pathways of possibility the prophecy describes. I do. And you acknowledge that the Department of Mysteries bears no responsibility for actions taken based on prophetic interpretation? I acknowledge this. Croaker studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward one of the black doors. Then follow me, Lord Potter. Director Bones, you may accompany us to the hall entrance but cannot proceed further without separate authorization. Amelia nodded, having expected this limitation. I'll await your return, Lord Potter. The door Croaker selected opened onto a long corridor lined with shimmering blue torches. As they walked, Harry sensed subtle changes in the magic surrounding them, pressure systems and verification wards that seemed to evaluate his magical signature with each step. Few prophecies are ever directly accessed by their subjects, Croaker commented. Most remain theoretical possibilities until external actions make one path dominant. Like Voldemort's decision to target me based on a partial hearing, Harry observed. Croaker's stride faltered momentarily. You are well informed. Increasingly so, Harry replied evenly. They reached another door, this one made of some dark material that wasn't quite wood or metal but something in between. Croaker pressed a palm against it, murmuring words too low for Harry to catch. The door dissolved, revealing a vast, cathedral-like space extending seemingly into infinity, filled with towering shelves holding countless glowing orbs. The Hall of Prophecy, Croaker announced. Home to every recorded prophecy in British magical history. Some date back to Merlin's time, others were spoken only days ago. Harry followed the unspeakable down a central aisle, trying to absorb the scale of the collection. Each glass sphere contained swirling silver mist, some brightly illuminated, others dimmed to near darkness. Active versus inactive prophecies, Croaker explained, noticing Harry's attention. The brightness indicates the probability of fulfillment. Many fade entirely when critical decision points pass. They turned down row 97, proceeding halfway along before Croaker stopped. On a shelf at eye level sat a brightly glowing orb, its silvery contents swirling with unusual intensity. Prophecy PS 310719880 APSR/LWVR, Croaker announced formally. Spoken by Sybil Patricia Trelawney to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, concerning Harry James Potter and Tom Marvolo Riddle, also known as Lord Voldemort. Harry stared at the innocuous-looking sphere that had shaped his entire existence. How do I? Only a named subject may remove it from the shelf, Croaker instructed. Once lifted, it will activate. Taking a deep breath, Harry reached out and wrapped his fingers around the orb. It felt unexpectedly warm, almost alive with magical energy. As he lifted it from its stand, the swirling mist inside began to coalesce, forming into a miniature version of Professor Trelawney. Her spectral form rotated slowly within the glass, then opened her mouth to speak in the harsh, rasping voice Harry had heard only once before, during his third-year divination exam. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies. The voice faded, but the miniature Trelawney remained, cycling through the prophecy once more before dissolving back into silver mist. Harry stood motionless, absorbing the words that had dictated the course of his life before he could even speak. "You may take the prophecy orb with you, as its subject," Croaker informed him. "Or return it to the shelf where it will remain accessible to you alone." Harry considered the sphere in his hand, then carefully placed it back on its stand. "I've heard what I needed to hear." Croaker seemed mildly surprised by this choice. Most subjects, once granted access to their prophecies, kept the physical records, whether from sentiment or security concerns. "Very well. The viewing is now recorded in the Hall's archives. Do you require a moment before we return?" "No." Harry's voice was steady. "I've lived with the implications of these words since I was 15 months old. Having the exact phrasing changes less than you might think." As they retraced their steps through the towering shelves, Harry processed the prophecy's wording with careful precision. "Power the Dark Lord knows not. Neither can live while the other survives." The words themselves were simultaneously vaguer and more specific than he'd imagined during years of wondering what secret Dumbledore had been keeping from him. "May I ask a question, unspeakable Croaker?" Harry said as they approached the exit. "You may ask. I may not answer. Has anyone accessed that prophecy record before me?" Croaker paused, seeming to evaluate the propriety of responding. "2 previous access attempts are recorded. One by Albus Dumbledore approximately 14 years ago, which was denied as he was not a named subject. The second by Minister Fudge 6 weeks ago, similarly denied." Harry absorbed this. So Dumbledore never heard the official recording. He only had his memory of Trelawney's original delivery. That is correct. Prophecies can only be removed or directly accessed by their subjects. All other knowledge comes secondhand. This explains something that had been bothering Harry, why Dumbledore had been so obsessively controlling rather than simply sharing the prophecy and collaborating on its interpretation. The headmaster had built his entire strategy around a prediction he'd never been able to study in its preserved form, relying instead on his memory of a single hearing. They rejoined Amelia Bones, who studied Harry's expression with keen interest. "Illuminating?" she asked simply. "Clarifying," Harry replied. "Though not in the way I expected." As they departed the Department of Mysteries, Harry's mind worked through the implications. The prophecy itself was surprisingly straightforward: 2 individuals marked as equals, one destined to kill the other. But Dumbledore's interpretation and subsequent actions revealed much more about the old wizard's character and assumptions than about Harry's predestined path. The lift ascended toward the Ministry's main level, and Harry made his decision. The prophecy wasn't a prison sentence, it was simply information that both Dumbledore and Voldemort had chosen to treat as absolute destiny rather than one possible pathway. "Madam Bones," he said as they reached the atrium, "I believe it's time for a more direct approach to certain matters." The visitors' room at the Ministry's secure holding facility was spartanly furnished, 1 table, 2 chairs, and monitoring charms embedded in the walls. Harry sat alone, waiting with perfect stillness that would have been impossible for his former self. The room's enchantments prevented any magic from being performed within, by either visitor or prisoner, creating a neutral ground for their conversation. The door opened, and Albus Dumbledore entered, escorted by 2 Aurors who positioned themselves by the exit. The former headmaster's appearance had changed dramatically in the week since the hearing. His silver hair and beard were trimmed short per detention protocols, and he wore simple grey robes rather than his customary colorful attire. The magic-suppressing cuffs around his wrists glowed with a faint blue light. Yet despite these external changes, his eyes still twinkled with their characteristic intensity as they found Harry's. "My boy," he said softly. "This is unexpected but most welcome." "Please sit, Professor," Harry replied, his tone polite but not warm. Dumbledore took the chair opposite Harry, his movements displaying none of the frailty he sometimes adopted for strategic effect. "I understand you visited the Department of Mysteries this morning. I hope you found the experience educational." Of course he would already know. Even imprisoned, Dumbledore's information network remained formidable. "I heard the prophecy," Harry confirmed. "The complete version, not just the fragment Voldemort knows." "Ah." Dumbledore folded his hands on the table, the restraint cuffs clinking softly. "And now you understand why certain precautions were necessary, however regrettable their implementation may seem." Harry studied the man who had shaped his entire life through manipulation and deception. Without the influence of loyalty potions, he could see Dumbledore clearly for perhaps the first time, brilliant but deeply flawed, haunted by past failures, and so convinced of his own interpretation of the greater good that he'd lost perspective on the moral cost of his actions. "What I understand," Harry replied carefully, "is that you believed I needed to be precisely controlled to fulfill a specific interpretation of that prophecy. What I don't understand is why you thought 47 different potions were justified." Dumbledore sighed heavily. "Harry, you were born with extraordinary magical potential, power that, if developed naturally, might have taken you in directions ill-suited to the path before you. The potions were carefully calibrated to guide your development toward the qualities necessary for your destined role." "And what role was that, exactly?" "Because the prophecy itself only says I have the power to vanquish Voldemort. It doesn't specify how." "That is precisely the point." Dumbledore leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "The manner of victory matters tremendously. I have studied Tom Riddle for decades, Harry. I know paths you might have taken that would have defeated him at terrible cost, by becoming like him, by sacrificing others, by embracing magics that corrupt the soul. So you decided to remove my choices entirely. To create a weapon that would function exactly as you designed." Dumbledore flinched at the word weapon. "I created a pathway, the only pathway I could see that would allow you to fulfill your destiny without destroying yourself in the process." Harry let silence stretch between them, considering his next words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. "You knew about the Horcrux in my scar." It wasn't a question, but Dumbledore nodded, a flash of genuine sorrow crossing his features. "From the night your parents died. It was unprecedented, a living Horcrux, created accidentally when the killing curse rebounded. And your solution was to prepare me for sacrifice rather than seek its removal." "Harry, no." Harry's interruption was calm but firm. "The goblins removed it in 3 days once they identified it." 3 days, Professor. "I carried a piece of Voldemort's soul for 14 years because you decided its removal was impossible without my death." Dumbledore's expression revealed genuine surprise. "They removed it without harming you? How?" "Goblin ritual magic combined with Egyptian curse-breaking techniques." Harry watched realization dawn on the old wizard's face. "Techniques that have existed for centuries but that wizards dismiss as lesser magic." "I explored every avenue wizarding knowledge offered," Dumbledore said, his certainty faltering visibly. "All research indicated a Horcrux could not be separated from its vessel without destroying both." "Wizarding research," Harry emphasized. "You never consulted the goblins or other magical races who might have different approaches. You decided I needed to die, and you shaped your entire strategy around that assumption. The truth hung between them, stark and undeniable." Dumbledore had truly believed Harry's death was necessary, had spent 14 years crafting a compliant sacrifice rather than seeking alternatives outside his sphere of expertise. "The potions," Harry continued, "weren't just about keeping me manageable. They were designed to make me accepting of death when the time came. To make me trust your judgment so completely that I would walk to my execution without question." Dumbledore didn't deny it. I believed it the only way, Harry. The prophecy states neither can live while the other survives. With his soul bound to yours. That's your interpretation, Harry pointed out. The actual words are ambiguous. Neither can live could mean many things beyond literal death. For the first time, uncertainty showed clearly in Dumbledore's expression. The possibility that he had fundamentally misinterpreted the prophecy, had built an entire strategy on a flawed premise, seemed to shake him more than the legal consequences of his actions. I came here today, Harry said, not for apologies or explanations, but to understand whether your actions were malicious or misguided. I believe I have my answer. And what will you do with this understanding? Dumbledore asked quietly. Harry stood, indicating the conversation was concluding. I'll do what you never allowed me to do, Professor. I'll make my own choices based on complete information. I'll find my own path to fulfilling the prophecy, one that doesn't require becoming either a sacrifice or a mirror of Voldemort. As he turned to leave, Dumbledore spoke again, his voice heavy with a complex mixture of pride and regret. You have your mother's wisdom, Harry. And your father's determination. Perhaps I underestimated what you might have become without my intervention. Harry paused at the door. That's the tragedy, Professor. We'll never know what I might have been. Potter Haven's war room had been transformed over the past week. The formerly unused chamber now housed a large round table surrounded by comfortable chairs, walls covered with maps and charts, and a sophisticated magical communication system linking to various allies. As Harry entered, he found Sirius, Hermione, and Neville already assembled, deep in discussion over a stack of parchments. How did it go? Sirius asked, looking up with concern. Harry took his seat at the table, automatically accepting the cup of tea Hermione pushed toward him. About as expected. He believes everything he did was justified by his interpretation of the prophecy. And that interpretation was? Neville prompted. That I would have to die to destroy the Horcrux in my scar, taking a piece of Voldemort with me. Harry sipped his tea, allowing the warmth to counter the coldness that always accompanied discussions of Dumbledore's plans. He genuinely thought he was preparing me for necessary sacrifice. Hermione's expression tightened with anger. The arrogance is astounding. To decide your death was the only solution without exploring every possible alternative. Typical pureblood thinking, ironically, Sirius commented. Dismissing non-wizarding magical approaches without consideration. Harry nodded. The revelation that the goblins removed the Horcrux seemed to genuinely shock him. It challenged his entire worldview. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Augusta Longbottom and Amelia Bones, followed shortly by Bill Weasley, his presence a relatively new addition to their strategic sessions. The eldest Weasley son had distanced himself from his mother after confirmation of her role in the potioning scheme, offering his unique expertise as both a cursebreaker and an Order member. The International Tribunal has set a date, Amelia announced once everyone was seated. Dumbledore's trial begins in 2 weeks, Geneva jurisdiction. And the other cases? Harry asked. 7 confirmed instances of student manipulation have now been documented, Augusta replied, her voice crisp with controlled anger. The Board of Governors has authorized a complete screening of all Hogwarts students, with parental consent. This development represented significant progress. What had begun as Harry's individual case had expanded into a systematic investigation of Dumbledore's influence across an entire generation of young witches and wizards. Any patterns emerging among the affected students? Hermione asked, quill poised over her ever-present research journal. Bill nodded. 2 distinct categories so far. First, students with unusual magical talents being suppressed, like Luna's magical perception or Neville's plant affinity. Second, students from politically significant families receiving loyalty adjustments to influence future voting blocks. He was building a controlled future leadership, Harry concluded, the scope of Dumbledore's long-term manipulation becoming clearer with each revelation. Identifying potential threats or assets and calibrating their development accordingly. Precisely. Augusta's expression was grim. A slow-motion coup spanning decades. The current political landscape was architected through selective suppression and enhancement, with key positions filled by those who owed their advancement to Albus directly or indirectly. The implications were staggering, extending far beyond Harry's case to the very foundations of magical Britain's governance. Dumbledore hadn't just been headmaster and chief warlock, he'd been the hidden puppet master shaping society according to his vision of the greater good. "This brings us to our more immediate concern," Amelia said, directing their attention to the large map of Britain displayed on the war table. Red markers indicated sites of confirmed or suspected Death Eater activity. Voldemort has maintained his strategic silence, but intelligence suggests he's consolidating power while the wizarding world focuses on Dumbledore's scandal. "The chaos benefits him," Sirius observed. "Our side is fragmented, leadership in disarray, public attention diverted. Which is why we need to accelerate our alternative strategy," Harry said, activating the table's central projection system with a gesture. A complex magical model appeared above the tabletop, showing interconnected magical signatures. "Hermione, would you update everyone on the Horcrux research?" Hermione straightened, assuming her natural role as research coordinator. "Based on the analysis of Harry's scar fragment, we've identified a specific magical resonance unique to Voldemort's soul pieces. The Goblins' curse-breaking team helped develop a detection method that can identify similar signatures at considerable distance." She manipulated the projection, highlighting several points across the British Isles. "We've confirmed 4 additional locations with matching resonance patterns. Combined with what we already know about the diary Harry destroyed in second year, that suggests a total of 6 Horcruxes plus the primary soul fragment in Voldemort's current body." 7 soul fragments, Bill murmured. "Magically significant number." "Exactly," Hermione agreed. "And based on the diary's behavior, we believe each fragment is housed in an object of personal or historical significance to Voldemort." Harry took over, bringing forward a secondary projection showing a timeline. "While Dumbledore was preparing me for an eventual sacrificial confrontation, we're taking a different approach. Systematic location and neutralization of the Horcruxes before Voldemort realizes his anchors are being targeted." The strategy represented a fundamental departure from Dumbledore's approach. Rather than an elaborate years-long game culminating in a predestined confrontation, Harry proposed a methodical dismantling of Voldemort's immortality through coordination of multiple specialized teams. "The Goblins have agreed to provide curse-breaking expertise," he continued, "while Madame Bones secures ministry resources without alerting Fudge's compromised inner circle. Bill's team will handle extraction and containment protocols." Augusta studied the projection with shrewd assessment. "And the final confrontation? Once the Horcruxes are eliminated?" "Will occur on our terms, not Voldemort's or Dumbledore's," Harry replied. "With proper preparation, strategic positioning, and combined magical approaches drawing from multiple traditions, not just wizarding." The plan was bold but pragmatic, leveraging resources and knowledge Dumbledore had either overlooked or dismissed. More importantly, it distributed responsibility rather than placing the entire burden on Harry's shoulders. "There's something else," Harry added, his tone shifting slightly. "Something I've been developing with help from the Goblins' ritual masters." He stood, moving to a clear space near the wall. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes, centering himself the way he'd been practicing daily. Then, without wand or incantation, he extended his hands palms upward. Light gathered above his hands, not the harsh illumination of lumos but something more elemental, a weaving of pure magical energy that took form slowly, condensing into a miniature representation of Hogwarts Castle floating above his palms. The model was extraordinarily detailed, showing not just the physical structure but the layered magical protection surrounding it, each ward visualized as a distinct color pattern. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the display of wandless, nonverbal magic that would have challenged even Dumbledore at his prime. "This is what the potions were suppressing," Harry said quietly, maintaining the complex magical construct without apparent effort. "Not just personality traits or specific abilities, but my fundamental connection to magic itself." Sirius was the first to find his voice. That's not normal wandless magic. That's something else entirely. Magical sculpting, Bill breathed, leaning closer to examine the construct. I've only seen hints of it in ancient Egyptian texts. The ability to visualize and manipulate raw magical energy directly. Harry allowed the construct to dissipate gradually. The goblins believe it was this potential Dumbledore first detected when I was a child. He recognized it as something that couldn't be controlled through conventional means, something that might develop in unpredictable directions. So he suppressed it entirely, Hermione concluded, her expression a mixture of awe and renewed anger at what had been stolen from her friend. Not entirely, Harry corrected. Just contained it within very narrow parameters. Enough to fulfill the prophecy as he interpreted it, not enough to potentially challenge his authority or follow a different path. The implications settled over the group. The Harry Potter who stood before them now, clear-eyed, centered, and capable of extraordinary magic, represented what might have developed naturally without interference. A wizard with capabilities beyond conventional British magical education, whose potential had been deliberately crippled for 14 years. The power the Dark Lord knows not, Neville quoted softly from the prophecy. Harry nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps simply one tool among many. I'm done placing absolute faith in prophecy interpretation. The meeting continued, shifting to practical matters of security, resource allocation, and immediate priorities. As strategies were refined and responsibilities assigned, Harry observed the group dynamics with quiet satisfaction. This coalition, formed freely rather than through manipulation, represented a new approach to confronting Voldemort. Diverse in background and expertise, united by genuine commitment rather than loyalty potions or blind faith in a single leader's vision. When the meeting concluded, Harry remained at the table, reviewing notes and projections while the others filed out. Hermione lingered, clearly wanting to speak privately. You're worried about something, he observed once they were alone. She hesitated, then nodded. Not about the strategy. About you. The magical development. No, well, yes, that's extraordinary, but it's something else. She sat beside him, brown eyes serious. You're changing so quickly, Harry. Finding your true self, developing abilities that were suppressed, it's amazing to witness. But I wonder if you're allowing yourself time to process the emotional impact. He considered this thoughtfully. Hermione had always been perceptive about the feelings he tried to conceal, even when his own awareness of them had been dampened by potions. I'm not ignoring the emotional aspects, he said finally. I'm processing them differently than before. The old Harry would have exploded with rage, then swung to guilt and uncertainty. The real me integrates these feelings into a more complete understanding. That sounds very balanced and mature, she acknowledged. But grief and betrayal of this magnitude can't simply be integrated away. They need expression. Harry's expression softened. And they'll have it, when there's time. Right now, with Voldemort gathering strength and the wizarding world in chaos, I need functional clarity more than emotional catharsis. Hermione nodded, though concern lingered in her eyes. Just don't build new walls to replace the ones the potions created. The real Harry Potter isn't just strategically brilliant and magically powerful, he's also someone who cares deeply, who feels injustice personally, who loves his friends enough to risk everything for them. Her insight struck a chord. In focusing on reclaiming his suppressed intellectual and magical capacities, Harry had perhaps neglected the emotional authenticity that was equally important to his true self. I'll remember that, he promised. And Hermione, thank you. For seeing me, the real me, even when I was hidden under layers of magical manipulation. She smiled, relieved. That's what friends do. The room of requirement had transformed itself into exactly what they needed, a spacious training chamber with reinforced walls, specialized equipment for magical practice, and a healing station in the corner. Though Hogwarts remained technically closed following Dumbledore's arrest, the castle's semi-sentient magic had granted access to Harry and his allies, recognizing them as students regardless of current administrative status. Again, Harry instructed, circling Luna as she faced off against a practice dummy. Focus on your natural perception. See the magic before it forms, not just after. Luna nodded, her usual dreamy expression replaced by intense concentration. As the dummy launched its attack, a harmless but visible spell, she moved not in response but in anticipation, stepping aside a split second before the magic even left the construct. Perfect. Neville called encouragingly from where he monitored the session's magical readings. That's the third consecutive anticipatory dodge, Hermione noted, making annotations in her ever-present journal. Luna's predictive ability is definitely strengthening. The past 3 weeks had seen remarkable progress as Harry's expanded circle worked to reclaim abilities that Dumbledore had suppressed. Luna's magical perception, her ability to see patterns and relationships others missed, had been systematically discredited as fanciful imagination through strategic potioning. Now liberated from those constraints, her talent was developing into a formidable tactical advantage. Similarly, Neville's extraordinary affinity for plant magic had blossomed once freed from suppression. His ability to sense and direct botanical energy had applications far beyond herbology, extending to environmental manipulation that could alter battlefield conditions in seconds. Your turn, Neville, Harry directed, resetting the training scenario. As Neville took position, Harry moved to stand beside Susan Bones, who was observing today's session with professional interest. As Director Bones' niece and a victim of Dumbledore's loyalty potions herself, Susan had become a valuable liaison between their group and the DMLE. Impressive progress, she commented quietly. 3 weeks ago, Luna could barely trust her perceptions. Now she's anticipating spell trajectories before they're cast. Harry nodded. Once freed from artificial constraints, natural talents develop exponentially, especially with focus training and supportive environment. Is that what happened with you? Susan asked, glancing at him curiously. This extraordinary magical growth? Partially, Harry acknowledged. But my case was more extensive. The potions weren't just suppressing specific abilities, they were constraining my entire magical development, reshaping my personality, and blocking key memories and intuitions. The systematic dismantling of those constraints had produced results that continued to surprise even Harry himself. Daily training sessions with goblin ritual masters and specialist wizards like Moody had unlocked capacities that would have seemed impossible mere months ago, wandless casting, elemental manipulation, and the rare magical sculpting ability that particularly concerned Dumbledore. Director Bones mentioned you've located a third Horcrux, Susan said, lowering her voice further despite the room's privacy protections. Confirmed its location, Harry corrected. Bill's team moves tomorrow night. A ring hidden in the ruins of the Gaunt Shack, heavily cursed, but nothing they can't handle with proper precautions. The Horcrux hunt was proceeding methodically, each success further weakening Voldemort's immortality while he remained focused on rebuilding his forces, unaware of the systematic dismantling of his soul anchors. 2 had already been neutralized, the diary years earlier, and a locket recovered from a grim house in London that had proven to be Sirius's childhood home. Their conversation paused as Neville completed his demonstration, an impressive display of instantaneous defensive vines that erupted from seemingly barren ground to immobilize multiple attackers simultaneously. Well done. Harry called, genuinely pleased with his friend's progress. That's twice the coverage area from last week. As the training session continued, rotating through different combinations and scenarios, Harry felt a quiet satisfaction that transcended the practical military applications of their work. Each student reclaiming their suppressed abilities represented a victory not just against Voldemort, but against the system of control Dumbledore had established, a system that valued conformity and compliance over individual magical development. We should wrap up, Hermione announced, checking her watch. The Wisengamot session starts in an hour. Today's Wisengamot meeting was particularly significant, the first full legislative session since the scope of Dumbledore's manipulations had been revealed. With new evidence showing the chief warlock had been subtly influencing voting patterns through strategic potioning of heirs and family members, the political landscape had fractured along new lines. Traditional alliances were dissolving as houses re-evaluated their positions based on newly uncovered information. "Are you ready?" Sirius asked Harry as they gathered their materials. The question carried weight beyond simple preparation. Today marked Harry's first appearance before the Wizengamot as Lord Potter, claiming his hereditary seat and formally establishing his political position independent of both Dumbledore's faction and the Ministry's official stance. "As ready as I can be," Harry replied. "Augusta's coaching has been thorough." The Longbottom matriarch had proven an invaluable political mentor, guiding Harry through the complex web of Wizengamot protocols and alliances with shrewd pragmatism. Her own position as a respected neutral voice gave her insights that transcended traditional light/dark divisions. "Just remember," Sirius advised as they left the room of requirement, "today isn't about policy positions or legislative outcomes. It's about establishing yourself as an independent political entity, someone who makes decisions based on principle rather than faction loyalty." Harry nodded, understanding the symbolic importance of this first appearance. In many ways, it paralleled his journey of personal liberation, stepping out from the shadow of others' expectations to establish his authentic identity. The Wizengamot chamber buzzed with tension as Harry entered, wearing formal Potter house robes of deep burgundy with subtle gold accents. Sirius walked beside him, similarly attired in black family colors, his expression serious but confident. They made their way toward the hereditary seats section, aware of the 100+ pairs of eyes tracking their progress. Augusta Longbottom nodded approvingly from her family's seat. Nearby, Amelia Bones maintained a professionally neutral expression despite their alliance. Throughout the chamber, members whispered behind hands and parchments, assessing the young Lord Potter's appearance and demeanor. The physical changes since his liberation from the potions remained a subject of fascination. Without glasses, with improved posture and a more centered presence, Harry bore a stronger resemblance to James Potter than ever before, though those who had known Lily Evans well could see her influence in his analytical gaze and the precise economy of his movements. "Lord Potter," greeted Theodore Nott Sr. as Harry took his seat. "Your first Wizengamot. A momentous occasion." The elder Nott represented one of many traditionally dark families reassessing their positions in the wake of recent revelations. With Dumbledore discredited and evidence suggesting his manipulations had artificially polarized political factions, old assumptions about allegiance were being questioned across the board. "Lord Nott," Harry acknowledged with a respectful inclination of his head. "Indeed it is." "Your statement to the Quibbler was most illuminating," Nott continued, studying Harry with calculated interest. "Particularly your observation about magical traditions being artificially restricted within Hogwarts' curriculum." Harry nodded, recognizing the opening for what it was. Many dark families had long criticized Dumbledore's progressive narrowing of acceptable magic taught at Hogwarts, a concern Harry now shared, though from a different perspective than traditional blood purists. "Educational diversity serves all students," Harry replied carefully. "Limiting exposure to certain branches of magic based on ideological categorization rather than ethical application creates artificial divisions in our society." Nott's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly intrigued by this nuanced position from the presumed figurehead of the Light faction. Before the conversation could continue, however, the chamber doors opened to admit Minister Fudge and his entourage. The minister looked distinctly uncomfortable, understandably so, given his precarious position. Having spent years as Dumbledore's sometimes opponent, sometimes ally, Fudge now found himself navigating a political landscape where both supporting and denouncing the former chief warlock carried risks. His solution thus far had been a careful fence-sitting that satisfied no one. "Lords and ladies of the Wizengamot," he began once reaching the central podium, "we gather today to address matters of significant importance to magical Britain in these unprecedented times." What followed was a masterclass in political equivocation, acknowledging the serious concerns raised by recent revelations while emphasizing the need for measured response and continuity of governance. Fudge proposed a series of minor reforms that would give the appearance of action without substantively changing power structures. Harry listened with polite attention, noting the reactions around the chamber. Traditionalists appeared skeptical, progressives frustrated, and most members simply wary of committing to any position while allegiances remained in flux. When the time came for responses from the floor, Augusta Longbottom was the first recognized. Minister Fudge proposes cosmetic adjustments to a system now revealed as fundamentally compromised, she stated bluntly. The evidence before us suggests not isolated misconduct but systematic manipulation of our governing bodies over decades. Tinkering at the edges insults the gravity of our situation. Murmurs of agreement rose from various quarters. Augusta had given voice to the unspoken concern many shared, that Dumbledore's influence had extended far deeper than initially believed, potentially compromising the very foundations of magical Britain's governance. What would Madame Longbottom suggest instead? Challenged Dolores Umbridge, the minister's undersecretary. Dismantling institutions that have served us for centuries. I suggest honest examination rather than willful blindness, Augusta replied coolly. Beginning with comprehensive testing of all ministry department heads and Wisengamot members for evidence of long-term potion influence. The chamber erupted in a mixture of outrage and support. The suggestion that senior officials might have been unknowingly influenced through potions struck at the heart of magical government's legitimacy. If voting patterns and policy decisions had been chemically manipulated, what legislation of the past decades could truly be considered valid? Amelia Bones rose next, her monocle glinting in the chamber's light. The DMLE supports Madame Longbottom's proposal. We have already identified 7 cases of sustained potion influence among ministry employees in sensitive positions. Internal security demands a thorough investigation. Fudge looked increasingly distressed as momentum built behind the proposal. Harry watched the political currents shift, waiting for the right moment to establish his position. When Lucius Malfoy rose to speak, surprisingly voicing qualified support for the investigation, Harry knew his opportunity had arrived. The chair recognizes Lord Potter, intoned the acting Chief Warlock, surprise evident in his voice at Harry's request to speak. A hush fell over the chamber as Harry rose. For many present, this represented their first direct exposure to the post-potion Harry Potter, no longer the impulsive Gryffindor of reputation but a composed young lord with clear eyes and deliberate presence. Thank you, Chief Warlock. Harry's voice carried easily through the chamber without magical amplification. I stand before this body not to debate specific proposals, but to address the philosophical question underlying our discussion. He paused, allowing his gaze to travel around the chamber, making brief eye contact with key members. Recent events have forced me to confront a difficult truth, that many of my thoughts, feelings, and decisions were not truly my own. That experience has led me to value authentic choice above all else, regardless of outcome. The chamber remained silent, members leaning forward slightly to catch every word. I believe magical Britain now faces a similar reckoning. We must ask ourselves, are our divisions and alliances genuine reflections of principled disagreement, or artifacts of manipulation? Have we been subtly guided toward polarization that serves someone else's agenda? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its implications yet impossible to dismiss. I do not stand before you as a representative of the Light faction, nor as Dumbledore's successor. I stand as someone who believes in magical Britain's capacity for self-determination free from coercion or manipulation. I support Madame Longbottom's proposal not from partisan interest but from commitment to authentic governance. Harry concluded with a formal bow to the Chief Warlock, then resumed his seat. The chamber remained silent for several seconds before erupting in a mixture of applause and intense discussion. By presenting himself as an advocate for autonomy rather than specific ideology, Harry had established a political identity distinct from both Dumbledore's legacy and traditional factional expectations. Sirius leaned closer, speaking quietly beneath the chamber's noise. Well played. Not aligned with anyone yet potentially aligned with everyone. Harry nodded slightly, observing the reactions across the chamber. Augusta looked approvingly satisfied. Amelia professionally impressed. Most interestingly, several members of traditionally dark families were studying him with thoughtful reassessment rather than automatic suspicion. The remainder of the session passed with procedural formalities, ultimately adopting a modified version of Augusta's proposal that would begin with voluntary testing of department heads before expanding to broader investigation. While less comprehensive than ideal, it represented a significant first step toward examining Dumbledore's influence systematically. As the session concluded, Harry found himself approached by a steady stream of members eager to establish direct contact with the newly independent Lord Potter. He navigated these interactions with careful courtesy, neither committing to alliances nor rejecting potential cooperation, establishing himself as approachable but not easily influenced. "Most impressive political debut," commented a voice behind him as the chamber gradually emptied. Harry turned to find Lucius Malfoy regarding him with calculated interest. "You've given many of us reason to reconsider previous assumptions. Times of revelation often require re-evaluation, Lord Malfoy," Harry replied evenly. "Indeed." Malfoy studied him with shrewd assessment. "One wonders where such re-evaluation might lead regarding other significant wizards who have shaped recent history." The oblique reference to Voldemort wasn't lost on Harry. Malfoy was probing, testing whether Harry's newfound independence might extend to questioning the traditional opposition to the Dark Lord as well. "I evaluate each wizard by their actions and choices, Lord Malfoy," Harry replied carefully. "Those who seek power through coercion, whether via potions or cruciatus curses, reveal similar disregard for others' autonomy, regardless of their stated ideology." Malfoy's expression flickered, acknowledging the subtle rebuke without taking offense. "A principled position, Lord Potter. Though principles sometimes encounter complex realities." "They do indeed. Which is why I judge actions rather than declarations." The exchange concluded with formal courtesy, both men understanding that while fundamental opposition remained, the nature of that opposition had shifted to something more nuanced than simple light versus dark positioning. As Harry and Sirius departed the ministry, they were met by Bill Weasley waiting discreetly near the secure Floo connection. "It's done," Bill said quietly once privacy charms were established. "The ring has been contained. 3 down, 3 to go." Harry nodded, satisfaction tempered by practical focus. "Any complications?" "Nasty withering curse on the ring itself. Would have killed anyone who tried to wear it." Bill's expression was grim. "Someone with Dumbledore's magical sensing abilities would have detected but possibly not identified it in time. If he'd found it first." The implication was clear. Dumbledore's unilateral approach to hunting Horcruxes might well have cost him his life, further delaying Voldemort's defeat. The collaborative method Harry had established, leveraging diverse expertise rather than relying on a single wizard's abilities, had neutralized the threat without casualties. 3 more, Harry murmured, mentally reviewing their intelligence on the remaining Horcruxes. "And then Voldemort becomes mortal again. He still won't be easy to defeat," Sirius cautioned. "Even without Horcruxes, he's extraordinarily powerful and surrounded by dedicated followers." "But no longer immortal," Harry emphasized. "And no longer facing a magically suppressed opponent guided toward sacrifice rather than victory." As they departed the ministry, Harry reflected on how dramatically the landscape had changed in just 6 weeks. Dumbledore awaited international trial. The wizarding government was beginning to examine decades of manipulated policy. And most significantly, the prophesied confrontation with Voldemort was proceeding on entirely different terms than either Dark Lord or Headmaster had anticipated. The prophecy itself remained valid, 2 wizards marked as equals, one destined to vanquish the other. But the path to that confrontation had been reclaimed from those who sought to control it, transformed through Harry's liberation into something neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort had foreseen. The shores of the Black Lake gleamed silver under the full moon as Harry approached the meeting point. Hogwarts Castle loomed in the distance, its windows mostly dark during the extended closure following Dumbledore's arrest. Only essential staff remained on grounds, preparing for the eventual reopening under interim Headmaster Flitwick's direction. Harry moved silently along the shoreline, his magic extended in subtle awareness of his surroundings. Though this meeting had been carefully arranged through secure channels, caution remained essential. Voldemort's forces had grown increasingly active in recent weeks, suggesting the Dark Lord was preparing to exploit the leadership vacuum created by Dumbledore's fall. A figure waited at the appointed location, silhouetted against the water. As Harry approached, Severus Snape turned to face him, his expression inscrutable as always. "Potter." "Professor." The greeting was neutral, lacking both the antagonism that had characterized their relationship under Dumbledore's influence and the artificial deference the potions had occasionally induced. They regarded each other with wary reassessment, two wizards discovering they had been pieces on someone else's chessboard, manipulated toward predetermined roles. "You received my message," Snape stated. Harry nodded. "Your position becomes increasingly precarious. I appreciate the risk you take in meeting directly." The acknowledgement of risk seemed to surprise Snape slightly. The Harry Potter he had known, or thought he knew, had never demonstrated such awareness of others' precarious situations. "The Dark Lord plans to move within the week," Snape said, getting directly to the point. "He believes Dumbledore's absence creates an opportunity to strike at the Ministry directly." "Through the Department of Mysteries?" Snape's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You are well informed." "We've been monitoring the situation," Harry replied without elaborating on his sources. "The prophecy record was our primary concern." "Then you know he seeks it obsessively." "His inability to understand why his curse failed that night, it consumes him." Harry considered this information against what they already knew. Voldemort's fixation on the prophecy represented both vulnerability and opportunity. "He doesn't know I've already heard it," Harry observed. "Nor that the goblins removed his soul fragment from my scar." Surprise flickered across Snape's normally controlled features. "They removed? How?" "Methods outside traditional wizarding knowledge," Harry replied simply. "The connection is severed. My scar no longer reacts to his emotions or proximity." This revelation clearly disturbed Snape, though Harry couldn't immediately interpret why. After a moment's consideration, the potion's master spoke carefully. "Dumbledore believed that connection essential to his strategy for your eventual confrontation with the Dark Lord." "Dumbledore believed many things that proved inaccurate," Harry replied without heat. "Including his certainty that I would need to die to eliminate that connection." Snape went very still. "He told you this?" "Not directly. But it became clear through our recent conversation that his entire strategy centered around preparing me for necessary sacrifice. The power the Dark Lord knows not was supposed to be willingness to die for others." "And now?" Snape asked, studying Harry with new intensity. "Now I believe the power referenced is something else entirely," Harry replied. "Something neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort fully understood because both view magic through the same limiting lens despite their opposing ideologies." He demonstrated by extending his hand, palm upward. Above it formed a perfect miniature replica of the clearing where they stood, complete with detailed representations of themselves in conversation. The magical construct required neither wand nor incantation, manifesting through direct manipulation of magical energy in a way few European wizards had mastered in centuries. Snape stared at the display with barely concealed astonishment. "That's not possible." "It wasn't possible for the Harry Potter Dumbledore created," Harry agreed, allowing the construct to dissipate. "For the real me, freed from 14 years of suppression potions, it's becoming increasingly natural." A complex series of emotions crossed Snape's face: shock, calculation, and something harder to identify, perhaps a reluctant re-evaluation of everything he thought he knew about James Potter's son. "I see," he said finally. "This changes the strategic landscape considerably." "Which is why I need to know exactly what Voldemort plans," Harry pressed, returning to the purpose of their meeting. "When, where, and with what forces?" Snape provided the intelligence with clinical precision: dates, personnel, access methods. The Dark Lord intended to infiltrate the Department of Mysteries through a maintenance entrance, using impervious ministry workers to bypass security. His objective was twofold: retrieve the prophecy record and secure certain artifacts housed in the DOM's restricted research areas. As Snape concluded his report, he hesitated, then added something unexpected. There is one other matter. The Dark Lord has been experimenting with the Dark Mark, enhancing its connection to his followers in ways that concern even his inner circle. How so? Increased sensitivity to his emotions. Direct magical drainage during certain rituals. And most recently, the ability to assume partial control of marked followers remotely. The implications were disturbing. He's treating his followers as extensions of himself rather than allies. He always has, Snape replied grimly. But his capabilities in this regard have expanded significantly since his return. Harry absorbed this information, seeing immediately how it might impact their planned confrontation. Is there any way to sever or block the connection? None that I've discovered. Though. Snape paused, studying Harry thoughtfully. Your ability to break free of Dumbledore's potioning suggests an unusual resistance to magical influence. Perhaps similar principles might apply. The conversation shifted to technical discussion of the Dark Mark's magical structure, how it bound itself to both magical core and life force, creating permanent channels for Voldemort's influence. Harry listened carefully, mentally comparing this information with what he'd learned about magical bindings during his work with the Goblins. I'll have our research team explore possibilities, he promised as their meeting concluded. In the meantime, minimize your exposure to direct contact with him. If he's enhancing the connection, each interaction potentially strengthens his control. Snape nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering him throughout their exchange. Why did you agree to this meeting, Potter? After everything that transpired between us at Hogwarts. Harry considered his answer carefully. Because I now understand that your behavior toward me was at least partially influenced by the same wizard who was controlling my development. Dumbledore needed you to see James Potter in me, not Lily Evans. He needed our antagonism to reinforce certain patterns. You believe I was manipulated as well? Snape's tone was skeptical, yet not entirely dismissive. I believe Dumbledore used everyone around him as instruments toward his vision of the greater good, Harry replied evenly. Including encouraging your worst impulses rather than your better ones when it served his purposes. This assessment seemed to strike a chord. Snape was silent for a long moment before responding. Your mother would have recognized what was happening to you. She was perceptive about magical influence. The reference to Lily, made without bitterness or deflection, represented a significant shift in their interaction. Harry accepted it with a slight nod of acknowledgement. Thank you for the intelligence, he said as they prepared to depart separately. It will be put to good use. See that it is, Snape replied, some of his characteristic acerbity returning. I do not risk my position for information to be squandered through Gryffindor impulsiveness. Harry smiled slightly. You'll find I'm considerably less impulsive these days, Professor. Another gift of freedom from the potions. As they parted ways, Snape returning to his precarious position within Voldemort's circle, Harry to the coalition preparing to intercept the planned raid, both men carried a revised understanding of their complex connection. Not friendship, certainly, but a recognition of shared manipulation that created space for more productive cooperation than either would have thought possible weeks earlier. Absolutely not, Sirius declared, pacing the war room with agitated energy. It's obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, Harry agreed calmly. But one we can turn to advantage with proper preparation. 3 days had passed since Snape's intelligence report. In that time, Harry's coalition had verified the information through independent sources, confirming Voldemort indeed planned to infiltrate the Department of Mysteries within the week. Now they gathered to finalize their response strategy. Voldemort expects to find either an unguarded prophecy or a token Ministry defense force, Amelia Bones observed. He doesn't anticipate a coordinated response independent of both Dumbledore and Fudge. Bill Weasley nodded, manipulating the tactical display hovering above the war table. We've analyzed the approach routes. Given the intelligence, they'll most likely enter through these service corridors, bypassing the main security checkpoints. The display highlighted a section of the ministry's lower levels rarely accessed by regular employees. Harry studied the projection, mentally reviewing the Department of Mysteries layout he'd memorized during his visit to hear the prophecy. The question, Hermione interjected, is whether our priority should be protecting the prophecy record or confronting Voldemort directly. Both objectives align if we position correctly, Harry replied. We know exactly what he wants and where he'll go to get it. That gives us the advantage of preparation. Augusta Longbottom, who had been listening silently, fixed Harry with a penetrating gaze. You intend to face him personally? It wasn't a question. Harry met her eyes steadily, acknowledging the concern behind her observation. The prophecy makes that inevitable eventually, he said. But this confrontation will be on our terms, with prepared positions, layered defenses, and multiple contingencies. Not the isolated duel Dumbledore was grooming me for. The distinction was crucial. Where Dumbledore had envisioned Harry as a sacrificial piece in a grand endgame, facing Voldemort alone after all other options were exhausted, Harry's strategy leveraged collective strengths and distributed responsibility. The prophecy states one must die at the hand of the other, Sirius pointed out, still uncomfortable with the plan. That suggests a direct confrontation. Prophecies are notoriously subject to interpretation, Luna commented dreamily from where she sat cross-legged on a cushioned bench. The hand of the other could mean influence rather than literal physical action. Harry nodded. Exactly. If Voldemort falls because of a strategy one designed, implemented by a team I assembled, that still fulfills the prophecy's requirements without requiring a theatrical one-on-one duel. This pragmatic approach to prophecy fulfillment represented perhaps the most significant departure from Dumbledore's philosophy. Where the former headmaster had treated prophecy as sacred destiny requiring elaborate manipulation to achieve, Harry viewed it as one factor among many, important information to consider but not an inviolable script to follow. The planning continued into the night, with each team member contributing specialized knowledge toward a comprehensive strategy. By dawn, they had established a multi-layered response designed to neutralize Voldemort's forces, protect the Department of Mysteries, and potentially deal a decisive blow to the Dark Lord himself. As the meeting concluded, Hermione lingered behind with Harry, helping organize the tactical projections for distribution to team leaders. You've changed, she observed quietly. Not just from the potions wearing off, but from how you're processing everything that's happened. Harry looked up from the maps he was annotating. For better or worse? Different, she clarified. More, integrated somehow. The Harry I knew before was full of contradictions, reckless yet insecure, passionate yet uncertain. Now there's a coherence to you that's both impressive and occasionally unnerving. Her assessment was perceptive, as always. Harry had been reflecting on similar observations during his daily meditation practice. I think the potions created artificial divisions within me, he said thoughtfully. Parts of my authentic self that couldn't be completely suppressed would emerge in contradictory ways. Now those aspects are aligning into a more complete whole. Hermione nodded. It makes you formidable. The strategic clarity combined with magical power and genuine conviction. She hesitated. It reminds me a little of how people describe Dumbledore in his prime. But with more humility. Harry suggested with a slight smile. Awareness of human complexity, she corrected. Dumbledore saw people as instruments toward his vision. You see them as participants in a shared endeavor. The distinction resonated with Harry's evolving understanding of leadership. Where Dumbledore had orchestrated from above, arranging pieces according to his solitary judgment, Harry found himself naturally building collaborative structures that leveraged diverse perspectives and abilities. Let's hope that difference proves decisive, he said, returning to the final preparations. We have 3 days until Voldemort makes his move. The Department of Mysteries lay silent and dimly lit, its labyrinthine corridors monitored by wards so ancient their origins were forgotten by most modern wizards. In the circular entrance chamber, Harry stood perfectly still, extending his magical awareness through the space around him. Beside him, Neville maintained similar focus, their complementary magical signatures reinforcing rather than interfering with each other. East Corridor, Neville murmured, sensing the first disturbance in the ambient magic. 3 signatures, no, 4. One's masked somehow. Harry nodded, maintaining his connection to the communication network linking their distributed forces. Through enchanted earpieces developed by Fred and George Weasley, who had enthusiastically joined their efforts after discovering their mother's role in Harry's potioning, each team maintained constant contact without revealing their positions through magical emissions. First contact, east approach, he relayed quietly. Positions hold. Their strategy was deceptively simple. Rather than mounting an obvious defense force that would alert Voldemort to their preparation, they had established concealed positions throughout the department, with specialized teams assigned to each potential entry point. The prophecy hall itself contained no defenders, only a sophisticated series of traps and monitoring charms designed to funnel intruders toward prepared interception points. Luna's voice came through the network, her dreamy tone somehow more focused in operational context. They're using disillusionment charms layered with magical dampening. 6 additional signatures approaching from maintenance level. Harry checked the tactical projection visible only to him through specialized lenses developed by Bill's team. The infiltration pattern matched their intelligence exactly, suggesting either Snape's information was accurate or the deception was elaborately consistent. Confirmed, came Moody's gruff acknowledgement from his position near the time chamber. First group has breached the outer perimeter. Bellatrix Lestrange confirmed among them. The identification of specific Death Eaters helped refine their response. Each of Voldemort's lieutenants had known combat patterns and preferred techniques, which their teams had studied extensively during preparation. For the next 20 minutes, they monitored the Death Eaters' careful progress through the department's outer defenses. Voldemort himself remained undetected, suggesting he was either maintaining extraordinary magical concealment or waiting to enter until his forces secured the approach. They're splitting into 3 groups, Hermione reported from her monitoring station. Main force proceeding toward the prophecy hall as expected. Secondary teams moving toward the research repositories. Harry exchanged glances with Neville. This deviation from their anticipated pattern required adjustment but didn't fundamentally change the strategy. They had prepared for Voldemort's interest in other DOM resources beyond the prophecy. Maintain primary positions, Harry instructed. Bones' team, shift to secondary containment protocol for the research section. Amelia's acknowledgement came through clearly, her team already adapting to intercept the unexpected movement. The flexibility of their distributed command structure allowed rapid adjustment without compromising overall strategic integrity, another departure from Dumbledore's centralized approach. When the main force of Death Eaters reached the Hall of Prophecy, Harry and Neville moved silently to their designated observation position. Through specialized viewing charms, they watched as Bellatrix Lestrange led a team of 5 hooded figures directly to row 97, proceeding with confidence toward the precise shelf containing Harry's prophecy record. "They know exactly where it is," Neville whispered, tension evident in his voice at the sight of his parents' torturer. Harry nodded, controlling his own emotional response through occlumency techniques. "Meaning either inside information or prior reconnaissance. Doesn't change our approach." As Bellatrix reached for the prophecy orb, the first layer of their defensive strategy activated. The moment her fingers touched the sphere, a substitution charm triggered, replacing the actual record with a sophisticated duplicate designed by Unspeakable Croaker himself. Simultaneously, proximity alarms throughout the department registered the magical signature of the transfer. "Duplicate acquired," Harry confirmed through the network. "Primary target still maintains original posture." The Death Eaters, unaware of the substitution, began a controlled withdrawal from the prophecy hall. Their movements suggested they expected opposition but had encountered none, increasing their caution rather than confidence. "Movement at the main entrance," Luna reported suddenly. "Powerful magical signature, it's him." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the department's ambient temperature. Despite extensive preparation, the reality of Voldemort's presence still carried primal impact, a predatory magical aura that pressed against ordinary wizards' instinctive defenses. Acknowledged, he replied steadily. All teams maintain discipline. Phase 2 initiates on my mark. The next 10 minutes unfolded with tense precision as Voldemort moved through the department's outer chambers, his magical presence disturbing monitoring wards designed to track much subtler intrusions. Though visible only through specialized detection charms, his power signature was unmistakable, cold, vast, and tinged with an unnatural resonance that marked extensive dark arts corruption. When the Dark Lord finally entered the circular chamber, Harry observed him directly for the first time since the graveyard. Tall and inhumanly pale, Voldemort moved with predatory grace, his crimson eyes scanning the identical black doors with calculating assessment. Unlike his followers, he wore no mask or hood, his serpentine features exposed in grotesque confidence. The prophecy approaches, he stated to the small group of elite Death Eaters accompanying him. I sense Bella's return. As if summoned by his words, Bellatrix and her team emerged from one of the chamber's doors, moving immediately to kneel before their master. We have succeeded, my lord, she announced, presenting the duplicate prophecy orb with reverent hands. None opposed us. Voldemort's lipless mouth curved in a satisfied smile. Of course not. With Dumbledore imprisoned and the ministry in disarray, none remain with both the knowledge and courage to stand against us. He took the orb, studying its swirling contents with intense focus. At last, I shall know the full text that has haunted these many years. Harry exchanged a final glance with Neville, then spoke a single word into the communication network, Mark. Instantly, the department's architecture began to shift. Doorways sealed, walls reconfigured, and the circular chamber's disorientation enchantments activated at unprecedented intensity. The Death Eaters stumbled, disoriented by the sudden magical flux, while Voldemort himself remained unnaturally steady, his eyes narrowing with immediate comprehension. A trap, he hissed, rage distorting his features. Potter. The duplicate prophecy orb in his hand dissolved into silver mist, reforming into a swirling miniature phoenix that burst into harmless but blinding light directly in his face. Simultaneously, the concealment charms hiding Harry's coalition dropped, revealing strategically positioned defensive teams at every exit point. Hello, Tom, Harry said calmly, stepping forward from his position with Neville at his side. Looking for something that belongs to me? The confrontation that followed would later be analyzed extensively in tactical training sessions throughout magical Europe. Unlike the chaotic duels of previous conflicts, the Battle of the Department of Mysteries unfolded as a coordinated defensive operation against superior individual power. Voldemort's rage manifested as devastating magical output, blasting curses that shattered stone, conjured fiendfire that threatened to consume oxygen within the chamber, and killing curses that ricocheted off hastily raised defensive barriers. His Death Eaters formed a protective perimeter, engaging the coalition forces with practiced coordination. But Harry's teams had trained specifically for this scenario, employing tactics that exploited the department's unique properties rather than attempting to match the Death Eaters' raw offensive power. Luna and her sensitivity team manipulated the chamber's disorientation enchantments, creating localized reality distortions that separated Death Eaters from each other. Bill's curse-breaking unit systematically neutralized dark arts effects, preventing magical escalation. And Amelia's DMLE veterans maintained containment, preventing escape while avoiding direct confrontation with Voldemort himself. At the center of the conflict, Harry faced Voldemort directly, not in the isolated duel Dumbledore had envisioned, but as the focal point of a strategic operation designed to contain and potentially neutralize the Dark Lord without relying solely on Harry's individual power. Your manipulator has fallen, and still you persist, Voldemort snarled, casting a barrage of curses that Harry deflected with wandless shields augmented by goblin-forged artifacts. Do you truly believe yourself my equal without Dumbledore's guidance? I believe myself your equal precisely because I'm free of his guidance, Harry replied, maintaining focus despite the magical maelstrom surrounding them. The prophecy never guaranteed your defeat, Tom. It merely established the possibility. Fury contorted Voldemort's inhuman features. You dare speak that name? You, a half-blood child playing at power you cannot comprehend? I comprehend more than you realize, Harry countered, simultaneously coordinating team movements through subtle hand signals. Including what you've done to your soul. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Voldemort's face, a momentary hesitation that revealed genuine concern. What do you know of such matters? Instead of answering directly, Harry gestured toward Neville, who activated a specialized magical construct developed specifically for this confrontation. Above the battle, a spectral representation appeared, 6 glowing orbs connected by threads of dark energy, with 3 already darkened and extinguished. The diary, Harry stated calmly. The locket. The ring. Half your soul anchors, already destroyed. The remainder identified and targeted. Your immortality unravels, Tom, piece by piece. The effect of this revelation exceeded their strategic calculations. Voldemort's composure shattered completely, replaced by primal rage that manifested as uncontrolled magical discharge. The chamber's very foundations trembled as he abandoned tactical engagement in favor of overwhelming force. You lie, he shrieked, his voice losing its cultured affectation. It's impossible. The same way removing the Horcrux from my scar was impossible. Harry challenged, maintaining his shields against the onslaught. Your arrogance blinds you to magical traditions beyond your limited understanding. The goblins removed your soul fragment weeks ago. Our connection is severed. This final revelation proved the tipping point. Voldemort's attack pattern shifted from strategic engagement to desperate extraction, focusing his remaining power on creating an escape route rather than pursuing victory. With a snarled command to his followers, he unleashed a catastrophic blast of magical energy toward the chamber's ceiling, creating structural damage that threatened to collapse the entire section. Containment protocols. Harry ordered through the network, immediately shifting to their contingency plan for this scenario. The coalition forces responded with coordinated precision. Luna's team stabilized the chamber's architectural integrity while Bill activated specialized ward stones that prevented magical transportation within the department's boundaries. Death Eaters found themselves trapped between advancing defensive teams and their increasingly unstable master. What followed was not the climactic duel of prophecy, but something more akin to a controlled extraction operation. With Voldemort's focus divided between escape attempts and managing his fracturing composure, Harry's coalition systematically neutralized Death Eaters while maintaining safe distance from the Dark Lord himself. He's attempting something, Neville warned, monitoring the magical fluctuations around Voldemort. Some kind of ritual invocation. Harry recognized the danger immediately. Cornered and desperate, Voldemort was attempting a forbidden technique, sacrificing his followers' magical cores to create a catastrophic discharge that might breach the containment barriers. All teams withdraw to secondary positions, he ordered sharply. Activation Code Phoenix, now. The coalition forces disengaged with practiced efficiency, retreating to reinforced positions as specialized defensive artifacts activated throughout the chamber. These goblin-crafted devices, another resource Dumbledore had never considered, created localized containment fields designed to redirect magical energy rather than simply blocking it. When Voldemort's ritual discharge came, it manifested as a wave of corrosive magic that consumed 2 of his own followers who hadn't retreated quickly enough. Their screams cut off abruptly as their bodies dissolved into ash, their magical cores visibly absorbed into Voldemort's expanding aura. But instead of breaching the department's defenses, the discharge encountered the goblin containment fields and ricocheted, creating a feedback loop that forced the energy back toward its source. Voldemort screamed in rage and pain as his own magic rebounded, distorted and amplified by the specialized barriers. In that moment of vulnerability, Harry executed the final component of their strategy. Not a killing curse or conventional attack, but a specialized binding ritual developed through collaboration between Bill's curse-breaking expertise and goblin ritual masters. The incantation, spoken in gobbledygook rather than Latin, targeted not Voldemort's body but the connection between his fractured soul and his constructed physical form. The effect wasn't immediately visible but manifested as a progressive destabilization. Voldemort's physical form began to flicker and distort, the artificial body created through dark ritual losing coherence as the binding magic interfered with its structural integrity. "What have you done?" he gasped, genuine fear replacing rage as he felt his form beginning to dissolve. "This is impossible." "Not impossible," Harry replied steadily. "Just magic you were too arrogant to study or respect." Recognizing imminent defeat, Voldemort made one final, desperate attempt at escape. Sacrificing his remaining magical reserves, he shattered the anti-transportation wards directly surrounding his position, creating a momentary window for apparition. Before the coalition forces could react, he vanished with a thunderous crack, leaving his remaining followers behind. The sudden absence of his overwhelming magical presence left an eerie silence in the chamber. Death Eaters, realizing their master had abandoned them, either surrendered or fought with suicidal desperation. Within minutes, the battle concluded with all remaining forces contained or neutralized. Harry stood in the chamber's center, breathing heavily but maintaining his focus as team leaders reported status through the communication network. The confrontation had achieved most of their objectives, Voldemort's forces decimated, his immortality compromised, and his physical form destabilized by the binding ritual. Yet the Dark Lord himself had escaped, though significantly weakened. "He's critically injured," Luna observed, her magical perception providing insights others couldn't access. "The binding took hold before he escaped. His constructed body is failing." Neville nodded in agreement. "The magical signature trail shows severe degradation. He won't be capable of direct conflict for some time, if ever." Harry absorbed this assessment, recognizing both victory and incomplete resolution. The prophecy remained in effect, neither truly could live while the other survived. But today's confrontation had fundamentally altered the balance of power, transforming Voldemort from unstoppable Dark Lord to diminished fugitive struggling to maintain physical coherence. As Ministry reinforcements finally arrived, delayed by Amelia's strategic scheduling to ensure the coalition maintained operational control, Harry surveyed the aftermath with mixed emotions. They had achieved a significant victory without a single casualty among their forces. Yet the cost had been high in other ways, requiring magical exertion that would take days to recover from and revealing capabilities they had hoped to keep in reserve. "It's not the end," Sirius said quietly, joining Harry as the cleanup operation began. "But it's a beginning he never anticipated." Harry nodded, watching as captured Death Eaters were secured for transport. Among them, Bellatrix Lestrange stared at him with hatred and something like fear, recognition that the child they had dismissed was gone, replaced by something they hadn't prepared to face. "We'll complete the Horcrux hunt," Harry said with quiet determination. "And when we face him again, it will be on our terms, not his or Dumbledore's." The prophecy remained, its words unchanging. But its interpretation and implementation had been reclaimed from those who sought to control it, transformed through Harry's liberation into something neither Dark Lord nor Headmaster had foreseen, a path defined not by inevitable sacrifice but by conscious choice and collaborative strength. As dawn broke over the Ministry, news of the night's events spread throughout magical Britain. The boy who lived had faced Voldemort again, not as Dumbledore's carefully crafted weapon, but as himself. Truly, completely himself for the first time. And in that authentic confrontation lay the seeds of a victory neither prophecy nor potion could fully predict. 3 months later, Harry stood on the grounds of a rebuilt Potter cottage in Godric's Hollow, watching autumn leaves spiral down from ancient oaks that had witnessed his family's history for generations. The small stone house, reconstructed using both magical and traditional methods, represented another reclamation, not just of physical heritage but of personal history long obscured by Dumbledore's manipulations. "It's perfect," Sirius commented, joining him on the garden path. "James would approve of the modifications to the original design." Harry nodded, studying the cottage with satisfaction. Where the original had been a traditional wizard's dwelling, the rebuilt version incorporated elements that reflected both his parents more completely, Lily's interest in combining magical and muggle approaches evident in the design, James's talent for protective enchantments embedded in the very foundations. "How was the Wizengamot session?" he asked, turning toward more immediate concerns. Sirius grimaced slightly. Contentious. The educational reforms passed, but only by 7 votes. Traditionalists continue arguing that expanding Hogwarts' curriculum to include non-European magical traditions dilutes our heritage. And the monitoring protocols? Renewed for another year without opposition, Sirius replied with greater satisfaction. No one wants to be the one arguing against testing for unauthorized potioning after everything that's been revealed. The political landscape had stabilized somewhat in the months following the Department of Mystery's battle. With Dumbledore awaiting final judgment from the International Tribunal and Voldemort diminished to the point of near invisibility, magical Britain found itself in an unexpected period of reflection and reassessment. Old factions realigned, traditional assumptions questioned, and governance structures examined with new skepticism. Through it all, Harry had maintained his independent position, supporting initiatives based on principle rather than faction, building alliances across traditional divides, and systematically dismantling the polarized political structure Dumbledore had cultivated for decades. Hermione sent an update from Hogwarts, Sirius continued, producing a sealed letter. Apparently Headmaster Flitwick's expanded course offerings are oversubscribed. Particularly the comparative magical theory seminar she's helping coordinate. Harry smiled slightly. Hermione had returned to Hogwarts for their 5th year, serving as both student and special assistant to the new administration. Her research into educational suppression patterns had proven invaluable in redesigning curriculum approaches. And the screening program? 17 additional cases identified, Sirius reported more soberly. Mostly mild loyalty adjustments, though 3 required more intensive treatment. The pattern remains consistent with our earlier findings. The systematic screening of students for unauthorized magical influence had revealed Dumbledore's manipulation extended far beyond Harry's case, though none approaching its intensity or duration. The pattern confirmed their initial assessment: strategic suppression of unusual talents, adjustment of political leanings and heirs to influential families, and subtle dampening of qualities that might have challenged established power structures. Their conversation paused as Luna emerged from the cottage, barefoot despite the autumn chill and carrying a tray of steaming mugs. Her role within their coalition had evolved from student to invaluable tactical advisor, her unique magical perception providing insights others missed entirely. The final team reports arrived, she announced dreamily, setting the tray on a garden table. Nagini has been contained. That's the last one. Harry and Sirius exchanged glances of mingled relief and anticipation. The Horcrux hunt had continued methodically despite Voldemort's retreat, targeting each soul anchor identified through their intelligence network. Nagini, the great serpent that served as both familiar and final Horcrux, had proven the most challenging to locate after Voldemort went to ground. Where? Harry asked, accepting a mug of spiced cider. Albania, Luna replied. Bill's team intercepted her during a feeding cycle. The containment ritual completed without complications. With this final success, Voldemort's immortality was truly ended. Whatever remained of the Dark Lord, weakened, physically compromised, and now fully mortal, represented a fundamentally different threat than the seemingly invincible figure who had returned in the graveyard months earlier. So it comes down to finding him, Sirius observed. No small task given his decades of experience in hiding. Harry nodded thoughtfully. He'll be seeking a permanent solution to his physical deterioration. The binding ritual damaged his constructed body beyond simple repair. Which limits his options considerably, Luna noted. That level of magical reconstruction requires specific conditions and exceptional power sources. Their strategic assessment was interrupted by the arrival of a ministry owl bearing an official-looking envelope sealed with the insignia of the International Confederation. Harry accepted the document with steady hands, though his expression revealed the significance he attached to its contents. The tribunal's verdict, he confirmed, breaking the seal and unfolding the parchment within. Sirius and Luna moved closer, understanding the personal importance of this moment. After months of testimony, evidence review, and deliberation, the International Magical Court had reached its decision regarding Albus Dumbledore's crimes. Harry read the document silently, his expression revealing nothing until he reached the conclusion. Life imprisonment, he said finally. Not in Azkaban, but in a specialized ICW facility in the Alps. No possibility of parole or position reinstatement. The verdict represented neither the harshest potential outcome nor the mere slap on the wrist some had feared. Dumbledore would live out his remaining years in confinement, his legacy permanently tarnished but his contributions not entirely erased from magical history. How do you feel about it? Sirius asked carefully, studying his godson's reaction. Harry considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Justice without vengeance, he said finally. Which is appropriate. His intentions, however misguided, weren't malicious in the conventional sense. He truly believed he was serving the greater good. While committing unforgivable violations of individual autonomy, Luna added softly. Yes. Harry folded the document carefully. The tragedy of Albus Dumbledore isn't that he became evil, but that he became so certain of his own righteousness that morality became flexible whenever it conflicted with his vision. The assessment revealed how far Harry had come in processing the complex emotions surrounding Dumbledore's betrayal. Neither clinging to artificial loyalty nor consumed by reactive hatred, he had integrated the experience into a nuanced understanding that acknowledged both the damage done and the context that shaped it. As evening approached, they moved inside the cottage where Neville, Hermione, and several other core members of their coalition gradually assembled for their weekly strategy session. The gathering had evolved from crisis management to long-term planning, focusing increasingly on rebuilding magical Britain's institutions rather than merely responding to immediate threats. The educational reforms are just the beginning, Hermione declared passionately during their discussion. The entire approach to magical classification needs restructuring. Labeling entire branches of magic as dark or light, rather than evaluating specific applications has created artificial limitations that weaken our society. The political structure requires similar reassessment, Augusta Longbottom added. Hereditary seats balanced with merit-based representation would maintain tradition while allowing fresh perspectives. Throughout the discussion, Harry contributed thoughtfully but without dominating, another departure from both Dumbledore's style of benevolent dictatorship and Voldemort's authoritarian control. The leadership model emerging from their coalition emphasized distributed expertise and collaborative decision-making rather than centralized authority. As night fell and the meeting concluded, Harry found himself alone in the cottage's small study, surrounded by books that had belonged to his parents, recovered from various vaults and collections after he gained full access to his inheritance. Among them, journals containing James and Lily's own magical research revealed innovative approaches and perspectives Dumbledore had systematically excluded from Harry's education. Sirius found him there, examining Lily's notes on the intersection of ancient runic systems with modern charms development. You should rest, his godfather suggested gently. Tomorrow's expedition to the Centaur territories will require full focus. Harry nodded, carefully marking his place in the journal. I keep finding pieces of them I never knew existed, he said quietly. Approaches to magic Hogwarts never taught, questions about conventional wisdom no one encouraged us to ask. That was deliberate, Sirius replied, settling into a nearby chair. Dumbledore's educational reform systematically narrowed what was considered acceptable magical knowledge. James and Lily both challenged those limitations, part of why he found them difficult to direct within the order. The revelation of this systematic intellectual suppression had perhaps been more disturbing to Harry than even the personal violations he'd experienced. An entire generation of British wizards had been educated within artificially constricted boundaries, their potential limited not by ability but by ideological filtering disguised as curriculum development. We'll restore what was lost, Harry said with quiet determination. Not by rejecting progress but by reintegrating valuable traditions that were discarded for political rather than practical reasons. Sirius studied him with a mixture of pride and something like wonder. You've taken what was done to you and transformed it into something constructive. James would be strutting like a peacock. Lily would be organizing research committees. Harry smiled at the characterization, finding comfort in these glimpses of his parents as complete individuals rather than the simplified martyrs Dumbledore had presented. The prophecy remains unresolved, he acknowledged, returning to the persistent reality that shaped their strategic planning. Voldemort still exists, even diminished. But on fundamentally different terms than either he or Dumbledore anticipated, Sirius pointed out. Without Horcruxes. Without physical stability. Without the advantage of surprise or a manipulated opponent. The observation encapsulated the transformation of their circumstances. The prophesied confrontation would still come, neither could truly live while the other survived, but its nature had been reclaimed from those who sought to control it, reshaped through Harry's liberation into something neither Dark Lord nor Headmaster had foreseen. When we face him again, Harry said with quiet confidence, it will be as ourselves. Not as weapons or pawns or instruments of someone else's design. That makes all the difference. As moonlight filtered through the cottage windows, highlighting the books and artifacts that connected Harry to his authentic heritage, the contrast with his potion-influenced past could not have been more profound. Where once there had been a carefully crafted tool designed for a specific function, now stood a young wizard discovering and integrating his true potential, magical, intellectual, and personal. The path ahead remained challenging. Voldemort, though weakened, represented a persistent threat. The wizarding world, though awakening to decades of manipulation, still struggled with entrenched patterns and prejudices. And Harry himself continued processing the complex legacy of having been shaped through magical coercion for most of his life. Yet unlike before, these challenges would be faced authentically, with clear awareness, integrated abilities, and genuine choice rather than artificial compliance. The loyalty potions had been designed to create a predictable instrument for Dumbledore's grand design. Their discovery and removal had instead revealed something far more powerful, a wizard capable of charting his own course, building authentic connections, and approaching prophecy not as inescapable destiny but as one factor among many in conscious decision-making. As Harry closed his mother's journal and prepared for tomorrow's diplomatic mission, he reflected on the journey from controlled pawn to autonomous agent. The Goblins' discovery had shattered foundations he hadn't known were artificial, forcing painful reckonings with betrayal and manipulation. Yet from those shattered foundations had risen something stronger, not just for himself but for the wizarding world he was helping rebuild. The prophecy's words remained unchanged. But their interpretation and implementation had been reclaimed, transformed through liberation into a path defined not by inevitable sacrifice but by authentic choice. And in that transformation lay the true power the Dark Lord had never known, not love as Dumbledore believed, but autonomy. The freedom to choose one's own path, unconstrained by either magical coercion or prophecy's determinism. For Harry Potter, no longer the boy who lived but simply himself at last, that made all the difference. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.